friends. Welcome back to another episode of the unofficial companion podcast to HBO's hit show, Industry. I'm Jen.
I'm Kristen.
And I was so excited about this episode. I started watching it the second we wrapped our last recap of the prior episode. And immediately I was texting Kristen. I was like, oh my God, pour yourself a glass of wine. You got to watch this. And then I actually texted Mickey and Conrad and was like, this was one of the best episodes of television I've ever seen.
It was so good. It was so good.
There's just so hyped up.
It was so rewarding for so many reasons. I mean, we were obviously very excited they had the financing part back because that makes us happy. But also there were all these other suspicions that we had in the very early episodes where we were like, oh my God, we were right about that. And so this was just, to your point, one of the most rewarding episodes of this show that I've ever seen. But anyway,
we're going to try something a little bit different today. So because this is so corporate finance heavy, I'm going to be doing the line by line recaps and Kristen's going to be walking you through what I hope will be a masterclass on her segment of the world. Because for those of you who don't know, Kristen not only worked in the investment banking division of the investment bank, as well as equity capital markets and a whole bunch of other things, but she then went on to teach this exact stuff, discounted cash flow models, valuation, accounting, all these things for over 13 years. And this is what she teaches here at the Wall Street Skinny. So like, this is Kristen's time to shine. I'm so excited. So I'll take a bit of a step back on the finance on this one. And I'm going to be asking a lot of questions because this is not my wheelhouse. So for starters, this is season 4, episode 6, Dear Henry. The episode opens with Harper in an elevator and the doors open. And it's Yaz kind of smirking. And Harper is smiling as well. And I am so excited because I feel like we're going to get finally our face-off that we've been waiting for this whole season. And it's funny because we had our declarations of war, if you will, from Sweet Pea and Harper last episode. But it feels like we're setting the stage with like an initial parlay, if you will, between generals before the hand-to-hand combat begins. So we cut to Yaz in her office sitting in the power position. Yaz says to Harper, "You've seen the app's uptake figures. Millions. It's a phenomenon." And Harper says, "Yes, come on. Whitney wants to leave you holding the bag, okay? I don't want to see the worst in the world. I want to see what's true. He is a pathological liar." And Yaz says, "Why do you always find a way to pick apart at my stability? My husband's. I mean, why would you choose to profit off of exploding my foundations?" Now Harper says to her, "I think we owe each other some kind of protection. He's not some hobbyist sociopath. He's a fucking criminal. You shouldn't blame yourself for being ensnared by him." So now we have Harper, who is making this extremely overt overture towards Yasmin to protect her. This is not what I expected to see. I expected Harper to come in guns blazing, tons of attitude, and she's actually coming to Yasmin hat in hand from a place of friendship. You disagree?
No, I agree 100%. I will say she's the wrong messenger for that. And by the way, remember that Harper was trying to protect Yasmin last season.
Yes,
last season, Harper was actually trying to protect Yaz, told Petra not to go through Yaz. Petra went around her back. Yasmin, trying to like do her job and be good at her job, gave this list of all the names of the ESG shit companies to Petra and Harper so that then they were 100% sure that they wanted to short Pierpoint. Eric ends up firing Yaz, and Yaz obviously blamed Harper, where you got that massive blowout between them. I thought that they were never going to be able to recover from like last season, and then they mended fences. But Harper is just the wrong messenger to tell Yaz that she might have been taken a fool by someone. I think that it's the wrong messenger.
I think you're right. I think the big difference between this season and last is when Harper tried to protect Yasmin in the Pierpoint issue, she never told Yasmin. She never read her in on what the danger was. So there's no way Yasmin could have known that she was protecting her. Harper's not making that same mistake again. She's going directly to her when this actually is potentially painful to her position. If she's letting someone in power within the company
That's a good point.
what they have on them, that all of a sudden gives them time to pivot, react, fix things, whatever it is, right? Now, you talked about how we left last season. They've been back in each other's lives, but they haven't been back in each other's lives in the intimate way that they once were. They never got as close again. And I think they've accepted each other's role in the world, but it's still been at arm's length. It's been like, come to this party so you can sit next to this political figure that advances your agenda, et cetera, et cetera. It's all been this chessboard still that they're playing with. So I don't think those walls have broken down. And the one time that we actually got them together in a room, snorting cocaine together for old time's sake, they got in a fight. So it hasn't been this lovey-dovey relationship. This is the kindest thing that we've seen from Harper pretty much ever.
And I want to say they got in a fight and it was Yasmin's fault. And so, I mean, I literally like went back to season 1 over the course of this past weekend because I just wanted to almost like remind myself of some of the things that we had seen. And in season 1, you had Yasmin who like so desperately wanted Harper's friendship, constantly trying the notebook, like decorated. I mean, literally. So she was always going out of her way to put herself out there for Harper, who continually kind of rejected her. And then it was last season where you started to see Harper giving back. You saw the friendship. They were on the boat. And then obviously there was the massive blowout. And then now they're back in each other's lives. But it's like at how much distance? So, yeah.
And so as this conversation continues, Yasmin reacts to Harper and says, genuinely kind of, what are you talking about? Because Yasmin doesn't actually know that there's anything super wrong at the company. She started to have some misgivings about Whitney in the last episode with how he was behaving around Henry, but she certainly doesn't have any reason to think that something is bad with Tender, the company, even if she has her suspicions about Whitney as a person. And Harper says, sorry, but the picture's now irrefutable. Ask Whitney about Tony Day, his man in Africa, the balance sheet fabrications. There's not one fucking piece of it that is real. And Yasmin is like, okay, blah, blah, blah. This is nonsense. She goes, and what will your compensation be if you manage to convince a few more people? You don't even know him. Anyone who doesn't know you could just as easily say that you're an abstraction of insecurities and compensations. Meaning, that's how I feel about you. It's kind of a very backhanded way of saying that.
I will say, I think there are so many parallels with Harper and Whitney, and I'm really excited to talk with them later. But like, they are in many ways, I feel like the same person. Yeah.
So Harper takes a deep breath after basically having just been slapped in the face and says, you've been duped by a man who saw you and your husband as fools. And Yasmin's like, she's not even listening at this point, right? So Yasmin says, you will always paint an image of the world that gets you paid. I mean, what is it you really want? You want Henry to resign so the stock price falls. You are a fucking mercenary, Harper. And Harper, like barely whispering, goes, there's like no empathy left in you, just an imitation of it to trap people.
I feel like that's very unfair of her to say that because Harper has always been the smart one, the one who was able to get ahead because she was the brilliant one. And Yasmin wanted to be like Harper. I mean, that's the whole thing. But to tell her, this man saw you as a fool. And for her to react this way, it's the most obvious thing in the world. There's so many other things she could have said, like you're overreacting. And it goes to, we're going to later talk about like sociopath, psycho, like we know that they've been kind of playing on this American Psycho reference, if you will, with Whitney. But she says there's no empathy, just an imitation to entrap people. And I think you can say that about a lot of people in this show. I just don't think that Yasmin is one of them.
Harper is almost projecting on her. As in like, if I, Harper, say this about Yasmin, I can then kind of say, you know what? I tried. I don't have to feel empathy for her as I take this company down. She can justify what she's about to say, which is, okay, you know what? We're not closing our tender short. We have higher conviction than ever, and now a very strong case, which I intend to present tomorrow at the Alpha Conference. And Yasmin crosses her arms, just kind of sassily goes, to the end. And Harper resigned, like, okay, you made me do this, till the end. This extremely dark orchestral synth music starts to play. And listen, much of this episode to me shakes out as like the various fronts in a war that is brewing between the Stern Tao camp and the Tender camp. And we had kind of like Stern Tao's first victory. And now it's a question of, okay, can Tender punch back? Who's going to come out ahead? What do these battles actually look like? So I was very much in like wartime mode. And remember, we've had this whole theme of Whitney as the commander. The question is like, who are really our generals in this war? Is it Harper against Yasmin? Is it going to be, Whitney, Henry, Eric, et cetera, et cetera? So I think like the battle lines have been drawn, if you will. But there's this idea of offering your enemy a way out in war that we'll touch on twice in this episode. And to me, this whole scene symbolized Harper offering Yasmin a way out and Yasmin not taking it and backing herself into a much worse corner by doing so. So just keep that in mind as we get to later scenes. Okay, so we cut to a darkened office and we have a phone ringing. It's Whitney calling Tony Day. Tony picks up and doesn't say a word during this entire exchange. He says, "Hey, it's me. I'm coming to see you after my quarterly with Jacob. Don't do anything you'll regret. Keep strong, stay focused." So again, like this general egging on his soldiers. Then in the background, we hear a shower running. Well, Whitney's dressed all in black. He's still like not in the bathroom. And as he hangs up, we hear two songs playing concurrently. One is on the radio in the background, and it's this song, Both Sides Now, which was originally written by Joni Mitchell in 1967, but it didn't become a hit until it was covered by Judy Collins in 1968, and that's the version that's playing. But before we get to that song, there's another song that is being sung concurrently by Henry. And this is when I flipped out and started texting you because he is singing the same song that Yasmin's father was singing on the yacht as he came up from below decks. It's this For He's an Englishman song from HMS Pinafore.
That was a good catch. I didn't catch that. That's wild.
So he is singing the same song that Yasmin's dad was singing when he came up to apologize before they get in their ultimate confrontation that then leads to his death.
But I think that it's important to also go back because they do a lot with music, obviously, in this show, and everything has been very purposely picked. So watching this the first time, you're like, I'm not really sure what this means. Then as you see the whole episode, you're like, oh, this makes sense. And then on second watch, it all kind of comes clear. But again, Henry's in the shower, singing away. Whitney walks into the bathroom with him there. Super creepy. Goes up very close behind him. Henry doesn't know that he's there yet. And then you hear the voiceover that says, "Dear Henry, there's a hole in my bucket." Mm-hmm. And so there's a song. It's like a kid's song.
Yeah, it's an old nursery rhyme.
It's an old nursery rhyme. That's all. It's like circular though. It's like, "Dear Henry, there's
reference."
Exactly. There's a hole in my bucket. And then it's like, okay, well, how do you mend it? And you need all these things, but then it's like back to you need water, but there's a hole in your bucket. And again, it's like, dear Henry, there's a hole in whatever. So literally the first thing we hear is, "Dear Henry, there's a hole in my bucket." By the way, when they close out the sort of "Dear Henry" that we hear throughout the thing, they close it with that. So the circularity like comes back. I just thought that was like very cool. And then it's the voiceover. Whitney's not talking. It's just his voice, but he's there with his mouth closed. Then he backs away with the flowers in hand. And then as he's backing up, that's when Henry turns around and sees him. But I'll let you, I know you want to say something.
I mean, there's a very famous shower scene and it's Psycho, right? Where I'm serious. What other scene do you have where someone fully clothed is approaching? It's a most obvious reference, right? Is the shower scene from Psycho. So there's this like sense of danger that you get. We've talked about the gaze on Kit Harington's body throughout. And one of our amazing followers pointed out that Henry seems to have cornered the market on salmon colored outfits. So even when he's wearing clothes, he's wearing like skin, and you'll see he wears a salmon colored sweatshirt in this.
Yes, at the very end.
Naked gaze on Kit Harington's body, constantly putting him in this position of vulnerability. Whitney, again, fully cloaked in a suit. But then he's got these flowers, and he's looking so longingly at Henry with this voiceover. So you're like, oh, okay, cool. So Whitney really is in love with Henry, I guess. And he has come to like make romantic overtures with this bouquet. What's going on? And so then Kit Harington does turn around. Notice Whitney is there, stands facing him, and it's just like, "Give me a minute, old boy," and goes back to his shower. I mean, I certainly know how I would react if my coworker were to, I think like last time we were at the hotel, I was in the shower and you like walked in the bathroom to get something. I was like,
I wanted to get my toothbrush. This is what happens when you're like a startup is you need to like share.
We share rooms, so we travel together. It's tight quarters.
Yeah. But I will add, Yas then comes in and screams at Whitney, "What the fuck are you doing in here in my bedroom while my husband showers?" That was actually the reaction that I was expecting her to have last time in the prior episode, where when she came in and they were like very suggestive and she dropped it. That's why I was like, does she know that like Whitney's trying to do something? And like, she seems like
you could give someone a pep talk and be like, "Good job, old boy," and it not be nefarious, but she was starting to suspect something. Now seeing this, by the way, like what's the timeline here? Like, what is Henry naked and showering after, before, whatever it may be? Like, did something happen between the two of them? And also, this is the first time we see Whitney ever caught off guard or ever anything other than perfection.
Yeah.
So he stumbles and he mumbles and he's like, oh, so sorry, I took a wrong turn. It's the first time we've ever seen him flummoxed or back-footed. And he goes, I was just looking for somewhere to make a phone call. Seriously, the worst excuse on a par with, I'm going to go return some videotapes. Okay. So like, he holds out flowers to Yasmin and he goes, I brought you some flowers, a small housewarming token. And she's standing there literally mouth open like a fish. Henry walks in tying his robe. By the way, one of the first times he's not in, I was expecting him to have like a salmon colored robe. It's actually like a dark blue robe. And I do think there is something to the colors of Henry's wardrobe, because the only time we see him not in salmon are the times when he is actually standing up to Yasmin. So he goes, Yasmin, why don't you calm down and stop jumping down people's throats at the smallest things? Now, because we heard Henry singing that song that her father had been singing on the yacht, to me, it's evocative of the trauma that she experienced walking in on her dad and the yacht worker hooking up in her bedroom. She seems to be reliving that trauma in a way with Henry and Whitney in this perverse reenactment of that dynamic.
Yeah. And I also will say, I mean, look, I think that there were so many parallels that we saw with, although again, Henry is nowhere, I assume, near as gross as her dad was, but it's like she proposed to herself with the ring off of her dad's dead corpse. And there were so many parallels that they had with Henry in terms of like his upbringing and everything, and Charles. So it kind of goes back to Yaz's thing. I think all children were meant to kill their father. I just like, are we setting something up here with Henry is her father?
And she's killing him again.
So I don't know. Yeah.
And he says to her, being such an exacting cunt usually means you don't have that much to complain about, darling. She is just in shock. And Whitney says, I just wanted to make sure you guys were settled in. I got to make some calls for the commerce secretaries coming in tomorrow. He turns to Yasmin, hands her the flowers. She turns away and throws them on the floor. And Whitney then turns to leave and says to Henry, like, call me.
Yeah.
And once he's gone, Henry turns to Yasmin, is like, was that entirely necessary? He's renting the fucking house for us. So now we know that they've left the Somerset property and they're living presumably in like a fancy London townhouse that Whitney is renting for them. Now, I think it's really strange that Whitney is renting this home for them. We know that the Mugs,
they should have money,
so much wealth.
Right.
So it's very strange
that
this is happening.
The fact that there was those tours that were going on at the home. Sometimes what would happen is you have these families and they actually don't have that much money. It's like, if you think about these huge estates, it probably takes a lot of money to run. And they would start to like get people to come in and do tours as a way to make money. So it could be that they don't have as much as they may appear to have. What they have is like status and society. And we hear kind of the conversation later from Haley about being born up into the right family and with the right upbringing. So I don't know. Maybe there's also almost like they just don't have the money that we think that they do, even though they have the staff.
We knew Henry's finances at the end of season 3, and we knew
and they do have a lot. That's
healthy.
True. Yeah, that's a good point.
Now, but hang on. We're not exactly sure how much time has passed, and we know that Henry was using drugs. Yaz was penniless, so it's not like she came to the marriage with anything. It was entirely his money. I assume that he's probably like not splitting that with her equally in terms of their day-to-day, because that doesn't seem
they have a prenup too.
Exactly. So to your point, I think that it's entirely possible that Henry's finances are maybe more, but they've given us no reason to think that. Like,
that's a good point. And it also could be one of these things too, where it's like, you know, when you are super rich like that, or you're a famous person, you know, it's like they expect to just have things paid for them. So it also could be more of like, well, of course they're going to pay for my house, because why wouldn't they?
Yeah, to me, I thought it was more of just another thing of Whitney having control over them, of like, I pay for your house. Like, I'm in control. Henry very well could pay for his house based on everything we know. So the fact that Whitney's doing it is more like, I'm in the driver's seat type thing. That's how I took it.
Yeah.
And so then the rest of the scene is actually kind of hilarious. Yasmin asked, did you know he was in here? And Henry goes, of course I didn't, even though we know that he did. And Yaz says, do you enjoy the fact that he wants to fuck you? I'm not an idiot, Henry. You told me that you sucked that guy's dick at Winchester. And he goes, darling, that was at school, okay? It's basically prison. Everyone gets a pass for that. You can be a homo at school.
But that was such an interesting point, actually. And it goes back to that like Nazi guy who made the same comment. And also it was interesting that Kwabena in the last episode was also talking about like boarding school being so terrible. I mean, I don't know. Did like the writers have a terrible experience at freaking boarding school? Like,
I mean, listen, I went to a half day, half boarding school, and all the guys who roomed together in these dorms would tell crazy stories of stuff they did together.
But I will say that I started to like get super excited and jump out of my skin at the next scene where we had the commerce secretary. And basically, I mean, it must have been like they're trying to portray Howard Lutnick talking about tariffs and everything. So you can start on this, but this is like, I mean, for Jen and I, who like spent all of last year talking about tariffs and what it meant and how it affect companies and like all of these things, for them to like reenact that was everything. So
yeah, so we have everyone sitting around a conference table at Tender's office. Off camera, we get Jennifer Bevan saying, "We all know that the president is a deal maker. There's nothing stopping us being deal makers, so long as that deal is good for all parties." The American envoy says, "The president's misunderstood by people in Europe. He wants less regulation and freer movement, a clean break with post-war terms." Well, Lisa Dern, who's known for not pulling any punches, says, "Not sure anyone knows what the strategy is. Some here think Americans got bored of having the best lives, so they elected a narcissistic dementiac," a word I'd never heard before, but now adore,
yeah,
to detonate it all so their kids might earn factory workers' wages building widgets pathetically stamped "Made in America." And then Bevan jumps in, conciliatory, and says, "In any case, we are grateful for you sitting with us and using Tender as a test case while we continue to thrash out a trade deal." So, Kristen, tell our listeners what's going on here.
Well, no, I mean, obviously last year there was quote unquote Liberation Day. I mean, Trump, US president, has been obsessed with tariffs for a long time. And then last year it was what, April 9th? Was it? That he came out and announced, they called it reciprocal tariffs. It wasn't really reciprocal. The way that they calculated like what the tariffs were was actually based on like the trade surplus or deficit on goods alone, not even counting services. And it caused massive chaos. I mean, they were tariffing an island that was inhabited by penguins. And then obviously there was a reverse. And since then, it's become a thing where there's constantly these huge announcements about massive tariffs that will get put on and then oftentimes rolled back. But it continues to be this thing where obviously we have the threat of tariffs from the United States. And, you know, if you think about the UK, they are a big exporter of products to the US. The US, I mean, we are a massive consumer-based country. We buy a lot of stuff. And so from a market standpoint, like people obviously want to sell into the US. And so I got confused later because we're going to have this whole conversation about like GAAP financials versus IFRS and auditors in the US versus internationally. And what they're basically setting up here is it seems like they're potentially going to be able to get a US banking license, which is
why I
huge.
They were having this conversation.
It must be. Well, because again, to your point, they're a payments processor. They're clearly apparently like a shitty payments processor, and now they're becoming a bank to hide the fact that that's becoming a bank. Yeah. So the only way that they would be able to like actually break into the US would be to get a US banking license. And it's interesting because we saw Tender acquiring Ferdinand's Bank, IBM Bauer, to get the Austrian banking license that then they would, you know, try to get grandfathered into the UK. I will say it is not inconceivable. I mean, I could see Donald Trump being like, sure, you can have a banking license. Why not?
And one of the things was, if you recall back to last year, it was like, who did we get a trade deal done with first? And it was the UK. And it's like, okay, this is supposed to be, they literally call it a special relationship. This is supposed to be our closest ally. This is like our mother country, right? That we split off from. So
I live in New England.
Big announcement. Trade deal done with. And we're all like, ooh, China? And then it's like the UK. We were like, well, duh. Like,
and no offense, UK, but it's just, again, it's not exactly as big as
a great trade deal with the UK. But like, of all that, it wasn't going to be like hostilities forever, God forbid.
We hope not.
It was just, Now, I don't fully understand what they are suggesting Tender has to do with this, and I don't think we're going to get an answer in this episode. At least I didn't see an answer, but that was where I was going with this. Is I was like, dude, these guys are going to take over the world if we're not careful, and we know that they're bad actors.
I mean, I don't know why they wouldn't have U.S. ambitions. Freaking Whitney's from the U.S.
Yeah, exactly.
As is Jonah. Yeah.
So from there, we cut to Henry seemingly getting dressed in his office again. After this meeting, it's got to get changed because he's constantly naked.
And it's dark. I will add, it's dark. It's interesting that there's a lot of different scenes where it's all lights off, basically.
Yes, great call. So Yasmin comes in. and very hesitantly and gently says, I didn't want to say this last night, but, and I was like, oh my God, is she pregnant? Because that's what I thought she was going to say. I was like, and Henry's like, what? And they leave this suspense. And I was like, oh my God, oh my God. And she goes, after Whitney left, I smelled booze on your breath. I was like, oh, okay. So Henry's relapsed. Okay.
I still think someone's getting pregnant in this season. That's my theory. Someone. Yaz.
Again,
I think it's Yaz.
The gun in the first act of the play. You do not have a gun visible in the first act of the play without somebody getting shot in the third act. I am totally with you. Somebody's going to get pregnant.
I love it. I love it how like getting shot is like having a kid.
No, but it's the old theatrical trope. Yeah. So Henry goes, yeah, I've repaired my relationship with alcohol. I'm sorry, I'm not an expert, but when you're an addict, I'm not sure that you ever really repair your relationship with substances. Like this is why AA and NA are like lifelong memberships, right? Like it's something that you deal with forever. And so Yasmin to herself is kind of like, okay, that's a textbook rationalization. And Henry goes, look, okay, I don't want to fucking hear it. I'm my own man. Isn't that what you always say? So Henry is pushing back on Yasmin for having tried to, what I felt like was truly help him, but clearly in his mind, he has construed this as Yasmin was trying to control him for her own benefit. And he is breaking free of her clutches and just falling into the arms of Whitney without really realizing it.
It's interesting because episode 2, I was like, they are in love. Then episode 3, the threesome episode, where there was just some questionable stuff that Yaz started to do. And you started to see her kind of going around Henry and inserting herself. So in his defense, I do think that she had given hints that like maybe there were elements where it's like her heart wasn't entirely pure. But again, she's on his side. So even if like she wants to get some recognition for herself, she also orchestrated him at this company to begin with, for better or for worse, actually. And I think that the way that he treats her this episode is so unfair. And like, it just was wild how he turned on a dime, by the way. He turned on a dime.
He did the second Whitney came into his life. That was the catalyst for it.
That's a good point.
I think
interesting.
He's suggesting to Yasmin basically that the worst things about herself are true. You know, they're going back and forth. She's like, when did you start drinking again? He says, I had a glass of champagne after Web Horizon. And she said, did Whitney give it to you? And she's basically trying to understand to what extent Whitney is or isn't manipulating him and, you know, using his powers to ensnare him. And Henry says, who cares? I wanted some. So Henry's so convinced that he had his own agency in this and that this wasn't Whitney manipulating him. And Yaz just says, I'm just concerned that because you seem on top of the world right now, because things are going so well, because you've been successful, that you think you can control it. And Henry, you can't. And Henry says, you know what I think? I think you want me out of control because that's how you're necessary.
Yeah.
And so she looks so hurt here because I think this is what she kind of suspects. And it goes back to how they got together. Her being with him gave her a place in the world again and gave her access and made her a critical part of the machinery. She's not necessary if she's off being minivan mom with Robert gallivanting around California trying to raise money for his shroom startup or whatever it is. She's necessary if she needs to be there to be Henry's minder and be his little good voice on his shoulder and be all the things that are like bolstering him. If that's Whitney, then what purpose does Yasmin have? Now, in Yasmin's defense, we have seen her be incredibly competent at the soft skill stuff, at the marketing. Yeah. She nailed the Web Horizon thing. Like that was a success. This was all her idea. So it's not fair to Yasmin. It's the same way it wasn't fair to Yasmin to say she was bad at sales, to your point in our last recap, that like she was good at some elements of sales. She is really good at figuring out how to manipulate people and how to tell a story.
I thought she had found her like place in the world, honestly, when like episode 1 opened of this season, because I was like, she knows the various people. She knows how to like get things done. She was working things. And I actually, to your point, she was very good at what she was doing. And it's wild to me that Henry doesn't see that, because it's like, well, yes, she might be manipulative a little bit. It's like, at least you're my little manipulative person who was like working for me.
Well, like, their interests are aligned. Also, like, let's call a spade a spade. It's not that you got into this relationship with her because of your blinding love and passion either. So, like, allow your interests to be aligned and be allies and move forward together rather than attacking her for her position in this. So I do think, though, when he says that, he realizes that that was like, maybe he should have pulled that punch. She does look legitimately hurt. Yeah. And this is where she says, Harper came to see me yesterday. He goes, God, don't let that bitch into our building again. She can't stand your happiness. So now all of a sudden, it's to your point about Harper and Whitney being so similar in terms of who they represent. Whitney is Henry's Harper, if you will, and Harper is Yasmin's Whitney in Henry's eyes, if you will. So Yasmin says, do you think he gained our confidence too easily? Meaning she is now giving weight to what Harper said because of how she's seeing Henry change and because of now like too many coincidences of like Whitney being around naked Henry.
Yep.
And he says, yeah, ours and the world. I mean, some feat. Perhaps he deserves a little fucking respect. You want to argue with our share price? You want to undermine my success again just when I'm healing? And Yasmin's like, healing? And he says, Yas, I don't know whether loving you properly is to make you aware of the things you cannot see, or is it more loving to perpetuate your delusions? So we didn't really unpack that Joni Mitchell song from before and talk about the lyrics, but basically so much of what that song is about life in love's illusions and kind of seeing them from both sides. And which would you choose, right? Would you choose the illusion that you see from one side and it feels nice to live in that illusion?
Well, I love the words. Can I just read it? It's rows and rows of angel hair, ice cream castles in the air. I've looked at clouds that way, but now they only block the sun. They rain and rain on everyone. So many things I would have done, but clouds got in the way. I looked at clouds from both sides now, from up and down, and still somehow it's clouds illusions. I recall, I really don't know clouds at all. But I love this song so much, and it was so perfect. So
now he says to her, do you not see that people can see how transparent you are? You think I can't see that you can't stand me front and center? I can't carve you out a place in the world. I'm literally on the way to dinner with our fucking auditor. I mean, some fucking scam that Whit's running. See you at home, darling.
Yeah. Like, bye. But I will say it's so interesting because he's like, do you not see that people can see how transparent you are? So much of what we're going to talk about with like these companies is actually the complexity and basically using complexity to hide what's really going on. So I do think it's interesting that that was just a word choice, which probably was completely random. But the purpose of accounting is literally to create transparency so that investors like know what's going on. So he's like, you're so transparent. Like, it's almost like, well, that's a good thing.
But it's also the clouds, right? So the clouds are either these white fluffy things in the sky that are these beautiful dreams, or they are blocking the sun. They are blocking the truth, and they are keeping you from what you want. So I don't think that word transparent was accidental at all. So we now go to fancy dinner with the auditors. We hear the main guy, who will learn his name is Jacob. He is our primary auditor, saying, you do understand that I may need more hands at the pump when it comes to preparing and filing Tender's audit. Henry says, Whitney tells me we're already over compliant by IFRS standards, or IFRS. Jacob says, but there are GAAP standards exclusive to America. Whitney says, forgive me, I thought your team remit was global. And Jacob says, technically speaking, but I'd humbly suggest a handoff to someone with US-facing expertise. Whitney says, I value you, Jacob, patting his chest, which Henry clocks. And then Jacob, now beaming, says, there have been instances where the UK and the US have recognized their audit frameworks as equivalent. We'll push for that. All right, Kristen, what the hell did they just say? Can you explain it for all of us, our accounting wizard here?
All right. So basically with accounting, there are rules so that companies have to prepare their financials so that an investor can look at it and understand what the hell is going on. So there are different rules in the US and then for the most part, the rest of the world. So in the United States, the financial reporting standards are what's called GAAP, US GAAP, stands for generally accepted accounting principles. And then in the rest of the world, minus Japan, that also reports under like their own GAAP, but it is international financial reporting standards. And so there's a lot of similarities. There's a few key differences, but at the end of the day, you know, you need to come up with, for example, your income statement, which is projecting at your revenues, like your expenses, blah, 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 your cash flow statement, and then your balance sheet. But on top of that, there's also auditors. So, you know, you can have like your CFO and whoever like prepare the financials, but then you have to have an independent auditor come in and make sure that the financials like actually are saying what they're supposed to and that you're following the rules. By the way, the auditors, you've probably heard of like your Deloittes, your PwCs, your KPMGs, Ernst & Young, like those are the big four, and they will do these audits. If you have one of those firms, that actually prepares the financials and like does the actual accounting. Because by the way, they're called like the Big Four accounting firm. You have to have somebody else basically do the actual audit. But so in the United States, additional rules were put in place after the Enron scandal. And so this is something that they actually talk about a little bit later. But Enron was this massive scandal that happened. And actually, Jen, you and I need to do a full deep dive on the book, The Smartest Guys in the Room. Yeah. So if you haven't like listened to our big podcast, we've basically taken a lot of kind of the classics. We did like Moneyball, we did Going Infinite by Michael Lewis that teach something really important and dove into all the different lessons and everything. But so The Smartest Guys in the Room was a book that was literally all about the scandal with Enron. And it was fundamentally an accounting scandal. And it's called The Smartest Guys in the Room because what they did is they were constantly almost like going to the edge of the envelope, like pushing the edge of the envelope in terms of what was actually allowed under various accounting standards. And then eventually they just like pushed right past it. It's like, you know, the only way, like they went through them and they were so far beyond. It's like the Joey Tribbiani, you're so far away from the line is a dot to you. So they were an energy company. And so, or I should say they were a natural gas pipeline company, and their CEO was Jeff Skilling, Chairman Ken Lay, and then the CFO Andy Fastow.
An ex-McKinsey guy, right? Mm-hmm. Ken Lay.
Dude, there was another, by the way, Valiant, which we're going to talk about later, also ex-McKinsey for the record. But so they, I think at their peak, were a $70 billion company by market cap. One of the things that they would do is if they entered into a contract with someone to like sell energy, and it was going to be, call it a 10, 15-year contract, they would book the entire thing like at once on day one so that they would show this like massive amount of revenue. And then in the future, right, it would be like
if you were an investor who owns a property and someone's supposed to pay you rent for the next 10 years, summing that all up and saying you got that as a check day one.
Right. Typically that is not allowed. And this also goes back to the point that like different industries are different in terms of like how complicated some of these things can become, right? If you have Starbucks and you're selling coffee, it's pretty simple, right? You have your coffee, you make a sale. Okay, you booked a sale. Like, what were your expenses? Okay, you booked an expense. And actually, one of the other things they mentioned was a coffee company. And like the fraud that they had to do was literally straight up fraud because there was no kind of creative accounting shit they could do. It was like literally just like, let's just make up some fake numbers. But when it gets to some of these more complicated companies, that's where all of a sudden you can like manipulate the accounting because again, if it's a contract and depending on like revenue recognition, like you literally need to go into the 10K and read what are the revenue recognition principles. It's not as simple when you're talking about selling a product for especially a lot of these more convoluted companies and especially with some of these banks and stuff, but it's not as simple as book a sale. All of a sudden you get cash. Typically, like you will sign contracts with people and then there's an invoice that's sent. So there is, again, that timing mismatch. By the way, the reason you need those 3 financial statements is you have your income statement. Again, there's different ways that you can report the revenue, but at the end of the day, the cash flow statement is what tells the truth. And so I just want to go back to the point we made in the last episode, which is like, you can make up a whole bunch of shit when it comes to the revenue and like get creative with it. But remember in this example of they sign a contract and they book all the revenue on day one, did that translate into cash? And so in the case of what they were doing at Tinder, they then went out and were like, oh, we had this huge acquisition. So like, that's why there's no cash. So anyway, the other things though that they did, because they did a lot of shady ass shit. So they would create something called SPEs or special purpose entities. And this is also something that we're seeing a lot now with the big AI build out in the data centers. So you actually just had Meta. They're building a data center called Project Hyperion. We talked about this in one of the skinny ons, but they need to finance it. And so they actually have another company. Now here is more, this is legit, right? They have like Blue Owl, who is the one who is actually owning that data center. And Meta then is going in as like, 20% ownership. But because of the way the accounting rules work, it is Blue Owl that owns it, controls it, even though like, again, I don't know how the accountant signed off on that, but okay. And they are leasing the compute. So really that keeps the debt that they need to create this data center off Meta's balance sheet. But again, there's like the legit times that this can be used where it's creative accounting, where it's the smartest guys in the room. And then there is the ultimate fraud. And so what Enron did is they would create these special purpose entities that allowed them to hide the debt, which again, we're kind of seeing with Meta, but hide losses. So if there was some kind of investment that went bad, they would just sell the asset to this SPE, oftentimes at like a huge markup. They did what was called round tripping, where they would buy and sell energy with other companies. I mean, almost like the snake eating its tail. It was like it's manufacturing revenues because they're selling it and buying it and selling it and buying it. So there was a lot of stuff that was going on that was just wildly illegal. Now, Arthur Andersen was the accounting firm at the time, and it was one of the most prestigious accounting firms in the world. And they signed off on all this shit. And when the truth came out, not only did Enron collapse, but Arthur Andersen went obviously as well. And so in 2002, this is when Congress in the US passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which created, and this is that public company accounting oversight board, and it imposed much stricter accounting rules and requirements. And so basically the CEO and the CFO have to sign up on the financial statements. You have the independence of the auditors. There's protection for whistleblowers. Again, remember, this is the United States versus this is not necessarily in the UK. And then harsher penalties for fraud. So this is going to be something that Harper brings up later, but I do think it's important to understand that one of the things that honestly it seems that Tender is trying to do is become a bank, because by the way, the financial and the accounting standards for banks are so much more complex than for, back to my example of like a Starbucks. So if you are a bank, now it's even more convoluted than being a payments processor. And you get to some of the same kind of accounting stuff that you saw with this energy company where it's like mark to market account. Like there's a lot that you can do to like hide what's happening. So with that, did that make sense?
That was amazing. If there's anyone who can make accounting sound sexy and exciting, it's you.
Oh, well, thank you.
We're interrupted at this point when the waiter brings over what apparently is a very expensive bottle of wine. We see Whitney engaging in his pre-crisis Florida realtor behavior where he's wining and dining everyone and enough to like impress Jacob. And so it's very clear through this that we are seeing what Jonah talked about play out, where Whitney loves to wine and dine, get everybody else drunk, liquored up, super happy, making them feel like he's taking them out, like they're so special.
Jacob said, I promised myself a bottle of this for my 40th, but I was unable to justify the price. I just thought it was interesting that they specifically chose the 40th birthday when that was the same birthday that Henry just had, where his dad killed himself on the morning of his 40th. So it could be totally random, but I just thought that was a very specific thing.
I thought they were just letting us know that, again, when I see people who look much older than us on TV or in my mind.
And then they're younger.
I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So while all this is going down, Henry says to Jacob, playing, I think, a little bit of a stand-in for the audience here, forgive my ignorance, but outline for me how an auditor's recommendation actually works. And Whitney kind of frowns and looks at Henry, being like, why are you asking technical questions at this dinner? And Jacob explains, well, there are checklists, fieldwork, vouching, and then either a clean report, a qualified opinion, or an adverse opinion. And Henry says, well, so what recommendation have you filed? Again, probably something the CEO should know. And Jacob says, a qualified opinion. Issues exist, but the financials are mostly reliable. And then Whitney puts his hand on Jacob's and says, nobody envies you having to parse our convoluted balance sheet. Henry is just staring at this little interaction. And Jacob says, like, happy with Whitney's hand on his, the law of averages says any balance sheet question marks in a company with a footprint like Tender's are down to delays in payments across banking jurisdictions or abstruse local customs around filing practices, as opposed to anything underhand. Now, Whitney and Henry are just staring at each other during this, and Whitney says, never blame anything on malign intent that you can equally chalk up to incompetence. So, like, we are seeing that Whitney is totally controlling this auditor, has him under his thumb, has been whining and dining and entertaining this guy, and has this long-standing relationship with him. Clearly, this guy is either incompetent, most likely, and doesn't have malign intents, because he doesn't seem like he's in on this big ruse. He's like, oh, we found some stuff, but like, whatever. And so it's very clear that Whitney is deliberately keeping this incompetent guy very close to them and hopes to continue this relationship as it seems like they have designs on the US.
Yeah. And so just two quick things. I thought I saw flashes of essentially Henry looking at Whitney's behavior with Jacob, maybe thinking, maybe what Yasmin said was right.
Yeah,
like he's starting to like recognize like, And same with Yas, by the way, right? Mm-hmm. She got that message from Harper and the immediate reaction was like, don't freaking say that. Like, you suck. I hate you. And then it's like, oh, maybe. But it's in her head, like maybe. And then she's like, oh shit, Whitney is being a sketchball. Mm-hmm. And maybe I should be taking what she said seriously. Yes, she was the wrong messenger. And I felt almost like Yasmin was the wrong messenger for Henry. But again, Henry starts to see it. He starts to, and then obviously, I mean, he just gets like blackout wasted and throws shit to the wind, which we're going to talk about. But sorry, one other quick thing. I did look up because I just was curious. how often you would get a qualified opinion. And so I'm going to blame Claude if this is wrong, but per Claude, the majority of public companies, like 99%, should be getting a clean report. Only 1% get qualified. So
got it.
like, it's really rare. It says for publicly listed companies in the FTSE 350, auditors typically resolve material disagreements with management before the final report is issued to avoid the severe market consequences of a qualification. And then in the wider market, it's a little bit higher, especially if you're private, but they're public. They're very public. We'll see later. They are literally dragging the FTSE down with them.
So not to be underestimated. This isn't just some like, oh, whatever, like you got a B+ on the test. This is like, no. Yeah.
And so why they're getting a pass, I mean, it can be because sometimes there could be like just issues with getting the information, but also all these companies are multinational. Like, come on, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So to your point earlier, when you were observing that Henry is clocking this interaction with Whitney, potentially questioning how much he's pulling the strings, I 100% agree with that he's starting to be suspicious of him. But just like his addiction, we're seeing him here at this table. The waiter pours all the wine. Everybody toasts. They say like, no curfew. We're all going out tonight, right? Henry takes a sip of that wine and you see him being like, oh, yes. Oh, that's very good. And so he's looking Whitney in the eye. He's watching this interaction go down. He's starting to become suspicious of his motives, but he almost doesn't care that he's being manipulated. Mm-hmm. And he's taking the sip of the wine, knowing full well what this represents for him, his sobriety, his mental health, all these things, and saying, fuck it, I don't even care. So I think he's very knowingly allowing Whitney to do this to him at this point. Mm-hmm. I don't think he suspects the worst about Whitney. And I think he's starting to, now again, asking these questions, being like, is there meat on the bone with what Yasmin was saying? But it's still not enough to be like, I'm going to do something about it, right? Instead, he's just letting himself be led along.
And I will add, I looked to see, do we see Whitney take a sip at all? And we did not.
No, yeah. So again, this is what Jonah had talked about, the American Psycho behavior. Everyone else is allowed to get drunk, whatever. So now we cut to the gay club, where we've got one of my favorite old Sarah McLachlan songs and like the Tiesto remix of it. I was like, oh, okay. Again, I love the music in this show. And it is funny. Somebody was like, you guys need to interview Vicky and Conrad. I've had this theory forever since the beginning that like the industry soundtrack itself, I think, is like a major key reworking of Love on a Real Train by Tangerine Dream from Risky Business. I'm convinced that that's what it was. And if so, I actually think it's brilliant.
Love it.
And so we've got Whitney and Henry dancing together. Henry's in his undershirt again. And we get Whitney's voiceover with our second Dear Henry. So this is Dear Henry number 2. Dear Henry, you have to be the person who makes the other feel safe in the fullest expression of who they really are while they are dancing together, no holds barred at this gay club. We see Whitney and Henry in their fullest expression of their homoerotic desires. And I think we have all but confirmed here that Whitney is in fact gay. And I think Henry's willing to swing whichever way the wind blows him because he is an addict. And I think this is part of his addicted personality. And so Whitney leads Henry over to a glory hole. And then
I thought that was funny given like the big opens with, there's a hole in the bucket.
Oh God,
like,
gross.
No, I'm just saying like it was an interesting choice to,
And so while Henry is experiencing this anonymous sexual interaction, Whitney is holding him and he says, everybody wants you. You're worth everything. Everybody wants you. Telling Henry what he's always wanted to hear, right? Mm-hmm. And as this all comes to a climax, we get our giant industry. We are 15 minutes in, okay, folks?
So number one, we obviously saw that like there was something going on with him and Jacob. I think there was probably something going on with him and Jonah. I think that like I had in that very first episode where him and Jonah were out at dinner, and yes, Jonah was talking about all the women and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But I still wonder if there was some kind of relationship with them as well.
Maybe.
Because I initially thought that they were like lovers. And then I was like, oh no, it's actually just like they're friends. And he's saying, I love you as like a friend. But actually, did he?
Well, and so much of their banter, it was like, do you still want me? Like it was this joking thing between them, which I actually took to be very like male code, like jock coded or whatever, but I didn't take it to be homoerotic. But it is funny that like that's the trope of the bros going back and forth in their banter is this mock homoerotic play.
Yes.
Which, you know, can also
but also could it be real
in this case?
And because again, that was how Whitney was controlling all these people. And I think, he was controlling Jonah. I do think, to your point, he stopped being able to control Jonah. In the very first episode, I was like, well, why did he get rid of him? Oh, because Jonah didn't want him to let him turn tender into a bank. So he's
Jonah
like, I got to get
smart.
rid of him.
And even though he was a drug addict, he was competent.
Yes.
Whereas Whitney just needed to install someone he could control.
Yeah. Now we also did see he had that encounter with Harper in the very first episode, but then also how they ultimately, where things ended up kind of also makes more sense given a number of his
this wasn't just a kink. This was that was his fullest expression of desire. Yeah. So now we're sitting here on the docks effectively. Dawn is breaking and we hear Henry saying, pretty sure my wife doesn't love me. And Whitney says, I feel bad for allowing you to get fucked up on my watch. Henry says, the only good thing about sobriety is my productivity. If I were a Muslim, I'd be a fucking billionaire by now. Whitney just laughs. And then Henry said, and I'd love it if you could help me out with this one, Kristen. He said, I found a diary entry from my father once. It said, the world is full of strippers, sherbet, and fluorescent. You don't want to be anywhere else. He must have forgotten that when he killed himself. And then, sounding a little hoarse, he says, maybe this is all there is. Euphoria. Now, to me, this was evocative of those lines from the Joni Mitchell song about the sherbet castles everywhere. But I actually didn't understand why he was talking about these lines from his father in his diary. The lines themselves didn't make any sense. I
took it as a very sinister foreshadowing that he has this euphoria, it's pure. He's drugged out of his mind, kind of back to the Jim Diker, you're just constantly getting the stuff that's going to get the dopamine hits and all that. And then he ultimately killed himself. I took that as here's Henry in this euphoric state. Now coming out of it, I took it as he's going to ultimately end himself. But I did think it was interesting that they used the term fluorescent, and it was not lost on me that we just saw the bright pink industry and fluorescent pink. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I think that they're doing something with the colors, but to me, this was almost very foreboding that Henry is having this, again, moment relapse. Of being high on the world, relapse. Everything is wonderful. But I think that that's going to your point, turn to ashes into his mouth or whatever they call it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, then Whitney says, hearing about this with Henry's dad, I never believed in suicide. My mother attempted it. My father wailed on her relentlessly. And Henry says exactly what I've been thinking this whole time. Yeah, I'm not sure I believe that. Why does everything from your life sound like a bad novel? And I did get this. I was like, he's just making all this crap up. Anything he talks about with his childhood or his past, even the stuff about the funeral homes, to be honest, I was like, I don't believe a word of this. There's just something about
I believe what he says to Harper. Only Harper.
After this. Oh, you mean?
I think he's been able to only open up to her. But I don't know. I think she's the only one that he can be honest around.
I like that interpretation. And Henry says, a little character fraud is fine as long as your heart is pure. And that's how I felt about Lumi. No matter what people said, my heart was intact, non-negotiable. And then Whitney nods, puts his hand on Henry's leg, and then we hear voiceover number 3. Dear Henry, what if I don't contain multitudes? And Henry puts his hand on top of Whitney's. Now, my weird read on this, because this was top of mind, so this is probably wildly incorrect, but he's just told this story of there was domestic abuse in my household between my parents. Do you remember, we were talking about Blake Lively last week. Do you remember the whole It Ends With Us drama, that one of the things that Blake Lively said about domestic abuse survivors is she was like, I want to remind them that they contain multitudes. And I was like, is this referencing that phrase that he doesn't contain multitudes because he actually wasn't a survivor of domestic abuse within his home, that this was all just a made up story? What if there is no reason for, what if I'm just the way I am and nothing more and nothing less?
Maybe. I feel maybe, but yeah.
I don't know. And so Whitney now somewhat hoarsely looks down and says, I'm very glad to know you. And Henry, looking off in the distance, just says, yeah. And then Whitney stands up. He's leaving. Clearly, he's going to Accra to go see Tony Day, as we know. And Henry, kind of dazed, just goes, okay, I might crack on. And he closes his eyes as the sound of applause fades in. Okay, so I'm going to set this next scene up.
Yep.
And then, Kristen, we're going to have you go through line by line because I know that this is what we've all been waiting for. This is the investment banking and private equity masterclass of my dreams. So we cut to the Alpha Conference, and this is the Women in Finance event where a woman is standing up at the podium, and behind her, there's this super cheesy like PowerPoint slide deck cover with Harper's headshot. It says Harper Stern, founding partner, Sterntown. And the title of the talk she's supposed to give is called A Practical Toolkit for Your First Decade in Finance. The subtitle is Women in Finance Keynote 2026. We see Pierre sit down in the audience, and then we cut to Harper talking to Eric. And Harper says, when I start talking, just stand by that door and usher anyone in, ideally with journalist accreditation around their neck. And Eric says, remember that speech you flubbed when you were a grad? Yeah, don't do that.
By the way, and that goes back to season 1.
Yeah.
So there was this speech that they had to give where it was like the Rift Day speech. And Harper had it nailed. Like she had a great speech that she was like listening in on her headphones, like psyching herself up, rehearsing it, all this stuff. And then she goes in to give the speech and she just chokes. And it's like, there was this whole plot where it was like, she didn't graduate from college because she had a panic attack while she was taking a test. And then this kind of was like her, almost like a redo where it's the same sort of final exam and she has a panic attack again. And it just like, it didn't really jive with the Harper that we had knew at the time. I think that one of the things that you and I have talked about how this season, I feel, and actually even a little bit into last season, they started to do a great job of actually letting you have glimpses of like where Harper came from and making some of her actions make a little bit of sense. But in seasons 1 and 2, she had very questionable choices. And there was not really any convincing reason for why.
Yeah, this is not the Harper of yore. This is the totally reformed Harper, and all of kind of Eric's hopes that he'd placed on her are coming true here. So we see Harper goes up to the stage and she brightly is like, hello, ladies. Rather than some mealy-mouthed bullshit about how to get ahead, I want to use this forum to offer you a front row seat to a woman doing her job to the best of her abilities. She goes and unplugs the USB connected to the presentation, switches to another, and the cover side simply says, in all caps, tender, too good to be true. So Harper continues and she says, Tender. I know we're all very familiar with Tender. Tender continues to be prized as a high-growth fintech, but its current market valuation is totally divorced from its fundamental risk profile. She then flips her slide to a graph, and we hear her say, our proprietary analysis suggests that a large portion of Tender's earnings may be entirely illusory. For any illusionist, distraction is paramount to the continued success of the ruse. So she flips her slide again, and Pierre leans forward in his seat. Now, there is a term here that I think is really important, which is fundamental risk profile versus kind of market valuation. And Kristen, when you talk about fundamental risk profile, what kind of analysis are people doing?
I'd say basically when you're doing a valuation and you're looking at quote unquote the fundamentals, but we call it like there's the 3 pillars of valuation. You have what's called the discounted cash flow analysis, which we're actually going to talk about in a minute. And we can go through what that is. And then you have comps where you can look at public comparables, and then you can look at acquisition comparables or deal comparables. Now, the discounted cash flow analysis, what you basically do is you project out the cash flows that you expect the business is going to generate, like into perpetuity. And then you discount those back based on how risky the business is. But a couple things here. So when you do that analysis, you ultimately are calculating something called the enterprise or firm value that is separate from what is left over for the equity holders. So if you're thinking about this Tender, right, part of the value of the entire firm, they have a number of different capital holders. They have equity holders who bought in. There's like the Peer Point. Really, let's just call it what it is. It's basically debt, right? They have a bond that's going to have to get paid back. That bond would get paid back first before whatever is left over for the equity holders. And so I often use the analogy when you're thinking about it for a company, it's very similar to like a house. Like let's say you own a house and it's valued at, you can sell it for $1 million, but you took out a mortgage for $800,000. If you sell your house and someone comes and pays you $1 million, you owe first the $800,000 left to the bank, and the residual equity that you have is the $200,000 that is left. And so I want to make that quick point because she is going to talk about that in a little bit. But she's saying if you do this DCF analysis, the value of the equity is separate from where it's trading in the market. That's what investors who are out there are placing on the value of this equity. On a fundamental level, it's far lower because they're not accounting for all this fraud. And so part of going through this whole exercise of like running your analysis is you need to come up with, what do the revenues look like into the future? What do the expenses look like? What are the taxes? What does the capital expenditures look like? To then figure out what is called the unlevered free cash flow is. And then you discount it all up and it's, whatever. Now, I will say there's the two other methodologies are what you use in real estate, Jen, right? Just comps. And so again, back to the point of like a house, you see a house and it's call it 2,000 square feet. You can look at what was the house down the neighborhood that's similar. What did that sell for? See what the price per square foot was where it was sold, and then use that, apply it to the company in question. The difference between public comps and deal comps is just in one case, you're looking at companies that are publicly traded. And so you look at like Tender's peers, maybe PayPal, right? Or in this case, JP Morgan or whoever, pick the right multiple, financial statistic, then poof, call it a day. Versus with a acquisition comp, you'd say, hey, in the case of a change of control. But anyway, I'm going to pause for a second because they do talk about one other thing with this, the sum of the parts and everything. So we'll get to that in a sec.
Awesome. So Harper has just described the fact that there is clearly a ruse going on here. And now she's actually going to expose that to the public for the first time. She says their remodel as a bank, the seeking of consumer deposits. And now we can see that the slide behind her is actually a copy of that photo of Tony Day holding up the novelty check for the Swift GC acquisition, is a craven and immoral attempt to bury past financial irregularities in an even more complex web of accountancy. This complexity has been central to their seduction, which I think is an interesting word, and confusion of investors, regulatory bodies, and even governments. Though they don't want us to focus on it, the market should be examining Tender's backdated accounts and their core legacy biz as a payments processor. And we now see the conference attendees frantically typing. So this is our key that like people are taking note and people are listening.
Yeah. And I just want to go back to that point too, which is like, at the end of the day, if you are an analyst and you're sitting down and building a model, you only get what is disclosed in the public financials. And so that is why if you have this shenanigans going on where you have accountants that are doing stuff that's like wildly illegal, like what you actually see versus what is like what you can get access to if you were an insider, those are two different things. And so even with public guidance and everything, I mean, some of this information, like some of the backdated accounts, they would likely have to do some of their own almost like forensic analysis and like actually somehow figuring out what that was versus like this isn't necessarily something that you as a investor can get from their 10K. So I just wanted to make that point that when, and they talk about how this complex web of accountancy, like what Enron did and what a lot of these scams have done is they are relying on people and like again, auditors almost signing off on accounting bullshit. So I just wanted to make that point.
Love it. She now says, our sum of the parts DCF analysis would yield a base case price target of £12 a share if we assign $2 to $3 billion worth of enterprise value to what we may term their core legitimate operations. She clicks the slide again, which shows a list of Tender's recent acquisitions. And she says, but this does not account for the nominal value. Let me rephrase, zero value we ascribe to their acquisitions across Africa and Asia Pac.
Yeah, I mean, she's basically saying, so the sum of the parts DCF or what's called sum of the parts analysis is they're going to value this like legitimate part of the business one way. And then I want to come up with what is the value of all these other acquisitions and then add it in. Now, the enterprise value, when she talked about that, the $2 to $3 billion, right? That's what you would get if you run the DCF. That is before you start to add in, like that's not the market cap. That is the value of the entire firm. And so I think what she's saying is like, here you have this 2 to 3 billion pounds of enterprise value. Now we need to add up these other acquisitions, but when we add them up, there's like no cash flows associated with them. I'm not entirely sure how she's saying the equity value comes out to £12 a share. We then add zero for these other things and now it's zero. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that's a little confusing.
Well, I think what she's saying is that their core legitimate operations are non-existent, just like these acquisitions are non-existent.
The thing is that we know that they are starting to take hold as a bank. So my understanding is she's saying, look, there is some legit operations going on.
So let me rephrase. Now that they have this app and they are behaving like a bank, they probably are doing real business.
Yes.
However, if we value all these other things at zero and this whole business has been a fraud, the value of the whole business should be zero.
But again, usually not, because they are going to have assets. Like here's what happens, right? A company goes bankrupt. You have the entire firm. The debt holders are going to have some recovery. They can be like, you know what? You own your office in freaking Canary Wharf. we're going to take hold of that.
Mhm.
Or you have an underwater lease at Canary Wharf, we're going to be able to come in and like, we'll be able to like somehow recoup some value there. You have the monitors, you have the land, like there are real assets that even if the freaking company's fraud, there's still real assets that they could potentially take hold of and recoup some of their value. So when you think about a bankruptcy or insolvency, there's the firm value where, by the way, the lenders are typically going to be able to recover something, but the equity holders, remember, they're the residual, they get wiped out. Using back to my example with the house, like if you own your house and I mean, someone comes along and offers you $750,000. Well, you still owe $800,000 left to the bank. You have no equity. Poof, your equity is gone. So if you were a shareholder, by the way, buying into tender, you are buying into the equity. So it makes complete sense that you're like, there's nothing left for the equity holders. It doesn't make sense to say that every single thing is zero. The entire firm would not be zero. And I think this was just, again, like a slight issue on my part with the writing. Like she could have said, this is what we have, assuming like we believe that this is legit. But given everything that we have now heard with the new audit, we believe that the legitimate operations also have some fundamental problems. But again, to say that the actual value of the whole firm is zero wouldn't necessarily make sense. But to say that the value of the equity is zero, that is.
I don't think she said the value of the firm is zero ever.
No, she didn't. But again, the way that she said the sum of the parts would yield a base case price target of £12 per share if we assign the enterprise value to their core legitimate operations of 2 to 3 billion pounds. But if they have the legit operations that are worth 2 to 3 billion pounds and you're coming up with the £12 a share, if you add zero for everything else, you still should get £12 a share. I don't know how you go.
See what you're
like
saying.
you need a negative number to then make it to go from 12 to 0. So that was why I was like, I mean, nitpicky on my part, but I was just like, well, I'm still not sure how you go.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I got it. So she then goes and says, listen, we did what nobody else bothered to do. We went straight to the source. There can no longer be any doubt about the associated cash flows of these businesses. The sum total of these forensic red flags, unexplained cash debt. At this point, by the way, Yasmin walks in, makes direct eye contact with Eric. False third-party acquisitions, and untenable valuation if earnings are adjusted for reality, and imminent regulatory and audit triggers creates the highest conviction downside scenario we have seen collectively in our time in markets. Again, totally ignoring the pure point.
We just saw pure point, yeah.
To go, like whatever. But at this point, by the way, evocative pure point, we see Anraj in the crowd. And I do remember Sagar at the premiere saying he wished they did more character development with Anraj. And we were like, is Anraj back? And he was like, I'm not saying anything. I can't say anything. And I was so excited. So I have been like actually waiting for an Anraj moment this whole season. I'm so happy we got it. I presume he's there on behalf of Petra's fund, which I think is also interesting. But anyways, so Harper says, so this morning I stand in front of you to tell you our bear case is now our base case. Stern Tao assigns a price target of £0, 0 pence to tender, 100% downside from current levels. And now we cut to Yasmin in the crowd looking totally shocked and horrified while we get that same ominous music we got from the opening scene. What did we miss, Kristen?
Oh, no. Again, this is like so obvious and most people probably completely know this, but basically when you are doing any kind of fundamental analysis or fundamental valuation, you typically are going to have various cases because at the end of the day, like you sit down, you build a model, your assumptions are usually well educated and all that. There's a lot of research that goes into it. They are guesses at the end of the day. And so typically you are going to have a bull case. You could have a management case. You could have a research consensus case. You are going to have some kind of, and then you could decide what that base case is. It could be the research case. It could be like your management. Like, so you could have a different, it could be your own proprietary case, which is more typical if you're going to have like the buy side. You're probably not going to just like trust research or management. If you're on the sell side and you're an investment bank, you typically are. You're just like, this is the research case. This is the base case, or this is the management case. And then you have the bear case, which is obviously downside. And you'll like have your little, scenarios and you like have a little switch in your model and you can go like 1, 2, 3. But anyway, so she's basically saying at the end of the day, the downside case is now what they expect to have as the base.
That's exactly right. So she says, Stern Tao also calls for an end to lackadaisical forms of oversight. This must morph to a new aggression, a fresh audit, and the publication of qualified financials. Case studies from the past, Enron, Valiant, Luckin, so we can talk about those in a second here, teach us that shorting insolvency is always lucrative. The short base is primed for explosion. Any rally now is a bear market rally. And as we're hearing this, we have cut to Whitney on his private jet, presumably to Accra.
So a couple things. I was like laughing. I was like, it's lucrative unless you're Bill Ackman, who by the way showed up in Valiant too, although on the wrong side, he was along. It was like his worst position ever. Actually, it was worse than Herbalife. Apparently he lost $4 billion. Yes.
Oh my God.
So Valiant also was started by a former McKinsey consultant, this guy, Michael Pearson. And it became like a Wall Street darling, if you will. And they had essentially like a roll-up strategy. Now they were a pharma company, but what was different about them is they were only spending something like 3% on R&D. Typical industry standard is like 15 to 20% because,
You're a pharma company, like duh.
It takes so much to invest so much R&D. Like the majority of drug discovery and pharma, it goes through the different approval processes and usually something goes wrong. So it's a needle in a haystack type of a thing. So that's why typical. Yeah, exactly. So that's why typically 15 to 20% is the industry standard and they were only paying 3%. What they would do though, is they would go and they would buy other businesses, like other healthcare businesses to get like the patents. And then they would drastically raise the price on the acquired drugs. So there was a heart drug that they increased the price 525% overnight after the acquisition. There was a lead poisoning treatment that they raised the price 2,700%. And then there was some real fraud. There was something called channel stuffing. Basically what they would do is there was a pharmacy. And so again, if you are a drug manufacturer, they would sell to the pharmacy, ship massive amounts of drugs to book the revenue immediately, even though those drugs still have not been sold to patients and like they could sit there for a while. So that's basically channel stuffing. Yes. Philidor was the name of the pharmacy. They had that relationship. There was insurance fraud where they were apparently putting restrictions on the more expensive drugs. Because usually with insurance will negotiate with these pharmaceutical companies that they're basically paying less. So if you're able to sell to an individual, like the poor schmuck, like if you don't have good insurance that covers it, like you have to pay the actual price. And then there was a bunch of like revenue manipulation. So if there was returns, so someone like returned the drug, they would hide that return. But around 2015, that's when short sellers first reported about this Philidor relationship and their stock started to crash. By the way, they changed their name to Bosch Health, but Bill Ackman, he was actually vocally supportive of them in the beginning. And then he later expressed a lot of remorse because he didn't realize like how terrible it was. But like also he should have seen that they were massively inflated. Like it's just, it's bad actors like that give these pharmaceutical companies. By the way, it's funny. When I was in college, one of the classes I took that I loved was this class called Biotechnology Management about the process of making these drugs and just how much goes into getting these to market. And it's one of these things where it's hard because it's like, if you don't have the profit incentive to get the drug built, like it's just never going to happen. It's like what we talked about with infrastructure investing. It's like, if there's no profit motive, then cool, you're just not going to get people to actually develop the drugs because it takes a lot of money to get it there. Anyway, I mean, I'm kind of getting a little off topic, but it is assholes like this who give the pharmaceutical company, who again, they're not saints or anything, but they are also creating drugs that are saving people, like bad fucking names. Cause like there's like outright fraud. And I mean, like increasing lead poisoning freaking price drugs, 2,700%. Are you kidding me? Anyway, Ackman was heavily involved with Valiant. It was one of his most notable losses. And so, I mean, Ackman is not doing, it's funny because he was on the wrong side. He was with, I mean, I would argue with
Ackman's greatest hits / worst here.
But I did think what was so funny is the Luckin Coffee scandal, I was looking it up and they were like, the fraud was surprisingly straightforward. They just made up sales numbers. And so then they'd have to obviously inflate the price of
that's actually what's happening with Tender. It is shockingly straightforward. It's just like they never bought these companies. There's no money.
Right.
Like, remember all those theories we had about what they could be doing wrong? They're not.
But they're basically hiding behind the complexity of like the bank
They're pretending that it's complex. Like you could possibly never understand this.
Never
it's
understand
a pie chart. No one knows how to read one of those. Yeah.
But there was a short seller called Muddy Waters Research who exposed the fraud. He used 92,000 hours of store traffic video, analyzed the actual receipts. But this is what I mean, back to the point about like there's the actual financials, like the public facing reports and stuff and like the 10K, or in this case, I believe it was this company might've been based in China, but because actually just to give you the background of this company. So Luckin Coffee was China's answer to Starbucks, founded in 2017, grew explosively. And I didn't look up if they were filing under international financial reporting standards under US GAAPs. But one of the things that they talked about was the fact that the corporate governance issues and the reliability of Chinese auditors did start to become a question here. But back to, again, like even in the UK, the audit rules are a little bit different than they are in the US. Oh, and then last couple things, the short base, prime for explosion, basically just saying that obviously Harper and Stern Tao is a short, but they are a tiny little fund.
They are the short base. So when you have open interest in any one of these stock names, there's people who are long and there's people who are short, right? And so you may have the total universe of investors who are active in the name, and you may have the long base and the short base in this case. So what she's saying is the short base is primed to explode. More people are going to initiate shorts. That's all.
Yeah. And last quick thing I did want to say, because they call this the Alpha Conference. Now, I assume that is an acronym for something, but also Alpha is like, when you talk about hedge funds, what are they doing? They are seeking alpha. And alpha is just how much you were able to earn above whatever the benchmark is that has been essentially adjusted for the risk that is being taken on. So it's a very hedge fund.
It's a very hedge fund name. It's a,
yes.
I mean, but
yes,
it's also a socially coded thing where you think of the alpha male, and this is alpha females, and Harper is the quintessential alpha, right? She's ruling the roost. So.
Well, I think, was it two seasons ago where someone was like, said king, and they're like, oh, should we say queen? She's like, no, I'm a king, man.
I'm a king.
Like,
yeah, exactly.
F you. So.
All right, so we'll finish Harper's speech here. She says, the emperor's clothes were shed some time ago. He's naked. He's afraid, as well he should be. Now, remember, we have cut to a vision of Whitney on his private jet here, but I do think it's interesting that we're talking about the emperor and him being naked. Who's been naked this whole time? It's Henry. Who's been the little prince? It's been Henry. So Whitney is obviously the one who is the mastermind behind this whole thing. It's not Henry, but I do think Henry is primed to take the fall before Whitney will.
Oh, yeah.
So she says, listen, sentiment will shift. The fall will be swift. It is never if, but when. The when is now. TikTok. Thank you. And that made me think, Kristen, not only the ominous TikTok, obviously, of like time's up or whatever, but the timing of everything that you have pointed out, how they've always been like, it's your 3 p.m., it's your 9 p.m.
Yeah.
And we'll see watches come in later.
Well, and also, again, even back to episode 2, where he got the watch from his dad. And then, yes, the watch later. But yeah.
So Yasmin gets up and leaves. She doesn't even look at Eric. And we see Whitney sweating, by the way. So I guess the air conditioning is still out, storming into Tony Day's office, and Tony's not there. And when he asks where Tony is, they're like, Tony's in London. So now we know that Tony has actually turned and is off to London now to come talk to Sternhound. We cut to Henry in the aftermath of some threesome with random naked ladies. He's naked again with only his open button-down shirt on. The naked ladies hand him his phone that starts ringing from under one of their garments of lingerie or whatever. And it's Yasmin calling him frantically, being like, where have you been? Have you seen what Harper's done to the fucking share price? And he's clearly hungover, and he's like, just chill, just fucking chill. I'm just caught between things.
Yeah.
And
I will say, she seems to love him again. Like, I
don't think so. I don't think this is love. I think this is fear and desperation. He literally like throws the phone, and you can still hear her shouting. She says, I can't believe you're doing this to me again. You've let me sit here for hours imagining the worst again. How can you do this to someone that you love? Henry, you're going to tell me where you are right fucking now.
Right. Yeah. It was just the fact that she was worried about his safety. And she's like, how have you left me here worried about you again? And I'm like,
I think like she doesn't want him to be dead, but I don't think she's like loving him, longing for him. I think she's like, dude, you're fucking serious? After what I just said to you, you're going and doing this to me? Like, you're the one who's saying, I don't know how to love you. This isn't the right way.
Yeah.
And so Henry is staring out the window as Yasmin's ranting on the phone. Naked ladies are getting dressed in the background. And we now have Dear Henry number 4, which is, Dear Henry, to he who has everything, more will be given. But whoever does not have, even what they do have, will be taken away.
And so that's like a Bible verse, or it's from the Bible. What
is that? Is that Job?
No, it's Matthew. So apparently it is the parable of the talents. The actual story is there was a master who had 3 servants, and he gave different amounts of money. So the first servant, he gave 5 talents, and the person invests them and gets 10. The second gets 2 talents, invests them and gets 4. And the third invests 1, buries it in fear, and obviously just has the 1. So the master then praises the first 2 and gives them more responsibilities, wealth. But then the third, who played it safe, is cast out into outer darkness, which I just wanted to make that point because there's so much dark in this episode. he says, and this is the actual line, so take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. For everyone who has, more will be given, and they will have abundance. But from the ones who have not, even what he has will be taken away. And
so to me, I saw this as just the commentary that we've had this entire show about the inequality and the intransigence of that inequality. That you cannot change your social station within this world of Britain and this world of industry that we're seeing, no matter what you do. So if you were already born with lots, more will be given. And if you didn't have anything, guess what? Like whatever you do have ain't going to work out so well for you. So I thought that was more about that social class. I didn't know that Bible verse. I think that's a great read.
It's also interesting just in the context of like investing capitalism. It's an interesting verse. And then to your point though, I think that the commentary about what it's like to be in a certain class in the UK and the immobility versus the US becomes a huge conversation a little bit later.
It's been a huge conversation throughout.
Yes.
I mean, I think that was ultimately in all the press that I've been reading about Rishi, again, trying to look for any glimmers of hope that Rishi might be coming back. There were so many commentaries that I've seen throughout the press about how this is really a commentary on what it's like to be born within effectively the caste system that exists in the UK. That's something that is so foreign to us in a way because America still has that social mobility that supersedes all other countries. And it's something that like we can argue about wealth differentials and blah, blah, but at the end of the day, social mobility here is still higher than pretty much anywhere else in the world. And so it is hard for us to reckon with those things as Americans.
Yeah. And people will accept you as being legit and not be like, oh, you weren't born into it. Well, like they don't care any.
An actual line in this episode.
Yeah.
So we've got our eyes on Whitney now, back on the plane, descending back into London, checking the share price on his phone. And there's this red light that's flashing, indicating that the phone is ringing. We flash to the boardroom where Ferdinand is in a meeting, but there's also the big exit sign that's lit up behind Whitney on the plane, right behind Whitney's head. And now the camera flashes to the emergency exit door. Kristen, you reminded me that the writers actually wrote a screenplay themselves titled Not an Exit Once. And we saw that brought up in season 1 when Greg wrote that same titled screenplay, obviously. And I think we're given to think that now with Tony having bailed, all of a sudden Whitney's looking for an exit. And
I'm wondering, does he want to kill himself?
Maybe. I don't feel like he's suicidal, but I think all of a sudden it's gone from Whitney being super in control to Whitney looking for ways out.
I agree with you. I don't think he's necessarily suicidal, but I did think it's interesting. They brought suicide up multiple times from Whitney's perspective with the Jonah commentary, with him talking about his mom, him saying, I don't believe in suicide.
So this is where we get Dear Henry number 5. We get Dear Henry, I'm a pathological optimist. Dear Henry, we're too close now to lose faith. Dear Henry, we are hardwired to live. So Ferdinand says, there's been a massive spike in volume. Share price indicates a large institutional short being built. Perhaps close to $1 billion wiped off our market cap requires a coordinated response. So now we know that the market is reacting to Harper's speech exactly the way that she'd hoped.
Yeah.
Whitney says,
I will say, and this reminded me a little bit of last season with Lumi, where I'm like, this isn't even a big freaking company. $1 billion off their market cap. Let's call them down 10%. That still makes them only a $10 billion company or 20 billion at most. This company seems small relative to the importance that it's taking on in the broader market.
Mm-hmm. It's not like a Mag 7. It's not like all of a sudden Amazon's falling apart and the whole S&P 500 is down is what you're getting at.
It seems like it's kind of like this little, fintech startup.
It's a fintech startup. Yeah, like that's a good point. So Whitney, playing his old cool, calm, and collected self, said, is Yasmin on the call? Ferdinand says her and her husband are MIA. And Whitney says, great. So our head of communications bailed on us. Good fucking day for it. Notice he doesn't blame Henry, just Yaz, because he's the one who put Henry in a compromising situation. He took him out, got him totally drunk, drugged up, whatever, left him, out on the docks, knew he was going to continue the bender. And Ferdinand says, maybe she was over promoted. And Whitney says, point taken. So again, everyone's shitting all over Yaz. And Whitney is the one who has put her in this terrible position where she's not coming to work because she, to your point, thinks her husband's probably dead on one hand, and then was at the Alpha conference doing the groundwork to see what was actually going on. So again, not sure that she's so bad at her job, but whatever. So
I'm with you.
There's this woman in the room. Okay, so now we get two people in the room. As far
I've
as I
never
can tell,
seen them
never
before.
introduced before. Okay, so
Literally some blonde
board
woman
members.
we have not seen before was
Yeah.
my note.
So the woman says we have a few options: renegotiate existing loan terms, some sort of bridge financing. So they're implying that the company is short on cash, and we're going to talk about why for a second. The man next to her says, on top of smaller, prudent maneuvers like expense reduction or layoffs, selling non-core assets like some acquisition in Africa or other satellites. We need a full refresher on the status of our Basel III liquidity coverage and core tier 1 and 2 positions. Well, okay, we know if they are in trouble with not having enough cash, they can't sell their acquisitions in Africa because they're not worth anything. So that's not an option. Okay. But so for those of you who want some really boring bank regulatory legalese, okay, what they're talking about here basically is Basel capital requirements are global rules that were implemented after the global financial crisis as all these reforms took place to ensure that banks can absorb losses without collapsing and taking down the global economy, basically. And so they measure capital as a percentage of risk weighted assets rather than total assets, which makes sense, right? Basically, how much liquidity can you access relative to how risky your overall portfolio is and your overall balance sheet is. Not just like, okay, I've got a whole bunch of like assets, but they're all like gobbledygook nonsense or like derivatives contracts or whatever it is, right? So you've got basically the strongest form of capital being something that is called common equity tier 1, which is common stock and retained earnings, right? Basically, like, again, cash that you keep out and you don't pay to your shareholders. So that's like the first line of defense. Then that also includes what's called additional tier 1 instruments, which that can be things like our COCOs, right? Which can become equity in times of distress. Then you've got tier 2 capital, which is like your subordinated debt, things like that. Something that basically only is going to absorb losses once you've already kind of like gone under and everybody else, like the equity and losses have been taken care of.
And I think just remember, right, if you think about the case of like a bankruptcy proceeding, who gets the first priority? It's the senior debt, then it's the subordinated debt, then you start to get to some of these other players who are at the bottom. So it's like, who's going to be able to actually withstand those losses? So it's like two different ways of kind of thinking about it. Very early on, you use the analogy of those cereal dispensers. So it's just, how are the losses going to get absorbed if there is a problem like this? By the way, this is where Tender could have used a COCO. But again, if you're Pierpoint, you're not gonna be like, let me give you this bond and like,
we're going to talk about the Pierpoint bond because I do think that this is like a critical plot point that got a little bit bungled, but we'll talk about that. So, but basically the way it works is you're supposed to hold these like very prescriptive percentages. So, and again, this is per ChatGPT, okay, because knowing these actual numbers, it's outside my purview. But
we are not fig bankers.
No, under Basel III, banks must hold at least 4.5% of that common equity tier 1, 6% tier 1, and 8% total capital. But those are the baseline minimums. Like all the large banks in the US and the UK have more like 10 to 14% to basically like keep the regulators very far at bay and not run up against any trouble with anyone. The US actually tends to be more conservative, whereas the UK and Europe tend to rely more on that additional tier 1 capital, which is those COCOs, which is how Credit Suisse got in all that problem and stuff like that. So anyways, Whitney says, this isn't a call about a cash situation. And Ferdinand says, it needs to be. If our price falls any lower, Pierpoint have a call provision in their $1 billion bond. I texted Kristen on not my first watch through this, but on my second watch through this to be like, I must have misheard this on my first watch through, so I'll do it again on my second watch through. No. Okay. So fuck the contingent convertibles, okay? This is basic 101s. A call option versus a put option. If I lend someone money and I say, hey, you know what? If there's a certain trigger, I'm nervous about you for whatever reason. I think you're not going to be able to pay me back in the future. I don't want this exposure to you. Or maybe I'm lending you money at a very low fixed rate and rates have sold off and I no longer want to receive this below market rate. Or your share price drops below a certain trigger threshold and I no longer believe in you as an investment. The investment that I've made in you, I no longer think is money good. I could embed a put option. A put, when it comes to options lingo, is the right but not the obligation to sell something at a predetermined price in the future. When I say I'm going to sell your debt back to you, what that means is You got to pay back the full loan once this trigger is breached. Okay.
But it's not convertible, by the way. It's literally just vanilla.
Anything.
Right. But I want to be clear. But when we say like the call option, it has nothing to do with share prices. It's literally, I mean, it can like be tied to that, but it's not.
Has to do with we're not talking about converts anymore. We're talking about a straight up putable bond.
This is just a bond. It's just a bond.
That was the plot point of Succession season 1. So here's what went down in my mind. And if you'll recall, basically like the plot point that launched 1,000 ships in Succession was that Logan Roy had structured a like off the books putable bond with some lender that was triggered effectively when their share price were to drop below some previously unfathomable level. But then Logan Roy has a heart attack and his succession plan isn't in place. And so everyone gets nervous about the company. The share price drops. And so all of a sudden, the lenders are saying, hey, guess what? You need to pay us back this giant amount of cash that you don't have. And now they need to go out and raise cash. And that's what all of a sudden starts everything off. In my mind, basically, they were like, hey, we want that same plot point here. Can we do that? And they went to their consultants. Their consultants were like, well, we don't really use putable bonds. They use COCO. So they were like, call it a COCO. Maybe it'll be a putable bond. Like left arm not talking to the right. That's all I can envision that went down because this is just a straightforward putable bond, not a convertible. And it's not how a call provision would work. It is the opposite risk program.
Right. It's the put.
So, just again, getting up on my high horses because if we're going to talk about bond options,
this is what we live for. I mean, like, this is what we live for. Converts, valuation, and in Jen, like the putable bonds. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, no,
but seriously, yes, like this is what we love. We love the finance stuff. This is literally why we started doing the deep dives.
Yeah. So then there's another interesting point where the woman in the room says there are other means of raising cash, payment deferrals, sale of customer data. And Ferdinand, all of a sudden offended, says, unacceptable suggestion to anyone with any fiber sat around this table. Let us recall that in our Wirecard example, it was what's happening with all of this customer data? What's it being used for? Whom are we spying on with this customer data, which is one of those things.
In episode 3, the Nazi people, they were very concerned.
Yes.
Well, yes, the Austrian bank, the IBN Bauer, the guys, Moritz and his mom, Johanna, they were very concerned about the sale of customer data. That's why they were pushing back.
Yeah,
because
but the irony is that Ferdinand has no qualms about selling customer data. There is just no customer data to sell.
But I don't.
We're going to learn a lot more about what Ferdinand's been doing.
Yes, but I actually do think there was customer data at IBM Bauer. IBM Bauer was
but there's no customer data at Tender.
No, there's no customer data at Tender, but they've done the acquisition now. So they own IBM Bauer. So they do have some legitimate operations and they can. So that was why I was saying this whole thing.
But I don't think he actually objects to this in any way, shape, or form because we know that he has been selling customer data.
Yes, agree. Okay.
So Whitney says, listen, guys, why are we talking about it like it's real? Okay. It's another farrago. I had to look up that term. That was a vocab word I didn't have. A farrago is a confused mixture of bullshit. Ferdinand,
by the way, this is wild. Jen, there's very few words that she has to look up. So that's pretty.
I vocab word. Farrago was one of them.
That's pretty impressive that the writers were able to find a word that Jen has not seen before.
Very kind. So Whitney says, Ferdinand, any further incoming from Pierpoint and government play for time. The price will correct with the right media appearance. I'll coordinate when I'm back from Accra.
Yep.
Ferdinand says, sure, slams down the phone. So now we are in the offices of Stern Town. We've got Sweet Pea hanging up the phone. And so she lets everyone know that Burgess called. Okay. Ed Burgess, the editor of Fin Digest. Tony Day is going to play ball. His flight lands tonight. Breakfast is at 7 a.m. Again, Kristen, you love your times. I'm going. Kwabena turns around smiling in his seat. And he goes, you want some more backup? And Sweet Pea looks at Harper being like, how do I handle this? Like, how do you feel, Harper? She told Harper that she and Kwabena slept together. Kwabena, whatever, is just like super Mr. Oblivious, like doesn't care about anything, whatever. Harper puts on this big show of smiling, leaning over to touch Sweet Pea on the shoulder. And she says, yeah, sounds good. All yours. Okay. So
this is so like two girls who are just like, that guy really is going to like try, like, sorry, guy, good luck.
Well, but I think she's also like, you can have him. Like, he no longer means anything to me. Like, I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
Okay. Meanwhile, Eric lets Harper know that CNN has said that Halberstam is slated to speak on their pre-European Open show the next morning. So simultaneously, before the market opens, Whitney's supposed to go on CNN. And Sweet Pea is supposed to meet with Tony Day and Ed Burgess. So Harper says he'd probably do anything to keep us from going up against him live and muddying his propaganda. And Eric says, well, maybe that's what we do. Oh, by the way, I neglected to tell you I saw Preston Carnahan at your presentation. And Sweepy says, Crotona Park? That's Jesse Bloom's new CIO.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah.
Fell out of my seat. I really hope they bring Jesse Bloom back.
Literally, I wrote KK prediction. Jesse Bloom will come back and fill the Eric-shaped hole left at the end of this episode.
I love that. No, don't cut it at all.
Okay.
God, I hope so.
Knock on wood. We think they're mentioning him. They kept him alive. They mentioned him here. They did dangle him last season with Otto Moston a couple of times. Yep. I mean, they've also placed the freaking giant squid cufflinks. Like, there's been a number of things. And I have one other little point that I made. So,
oh, good. And again, we have no idea. But that would be such an amazing plot point. So then we have this very silly thing where Eric asks Kwabena to diagram their P&L out on a whiteboard. And all Kwabena basically does is write down that they have made $3 million. Okay, so we find out that the stock is down 20% on the day in the 3 minutes since the US market has come in. And now everyone is selling the crap out of this stock. And they are now up 3 million other positions. So they have totally reversed all the losses that they had.
But I want to make one more point. So they also have a few more things that he writes. He writes PX, so price 292, which by the way is wild. If they're saying their price target initially was 12 and then now it's 0.
They're basically up 2.5%, which the whole point of this, right, is they're standing there with like glasses of whiskey. They're all standing around like celebrating this basically. And Eric gives a little speech and he says, my life in the markets overlays perfectly onto my life rooting for the Mets. We've talked about this previously.
So many ways to lose.
Exactly. He says you lose all the time in new and oftenly thrillingly inventive ways, praying for the counterbalance, that one miraculous run that makes you live again. Harpoon. So now he's got a new name for Harper. Okay. It's not harpsichord, it's harpoon.
That's what I wrote. And that was the whole thing with them, the cufflinks. And it's like, what do you harpoon? The giant squid, a giant whale. Cool. Like you get the Jesse Bloom back. That. So I don't know. That was my whole thing when they decided to change the name to Harpoon. And they literally zoomed in on those cufflinks. Like,
I thought it was more like harpsichord, that thing that you're playing. Like, oh, we're like playing at being this, but now you really are a weapon, right? You are a straight up killer.
You're a warrior. Yeah. You're a fighter.
He says, I can't quite believe it, but you just gave me my favorite ever day in finance. And like us, and meanwhile at this point, I'm like, this is my favorite ever day in the show. I'm so happy. And he says, and we're only up small. You feel good? And Harper sheepishly agrees, I guess, and they all cheers. Now, based on our back of the envelope math, generously they're up about 2.5%. Really, it's probably more like a little over 1% based on the original size of this fund and the leverage that they had. So like the whole point is that this is it, right? This is the feeling. It's not even about the number. It's back to Rishi. It's the winning, right?
It's the winning.
They have been right. And they are so validated. And like everything is firing on all cylinders for them because they have a good idea. And by the way, they like didn't get to this point by illegal means. Like they actually went and did the work, and like Sweepy did the right work in Accra. Like it wasn't that she did anything vicious or underhanded or whatever. They're getting a source, like they're doing it all, and it's great. And they're winning for like 1 second.
Yeah. Nice. I know. And I literally, you lose all the time in new and often thrilling, inventive ways. I was like,
we know that this cannot last. We know.
No. Yeah.
So we're back to Whitney in his office. Haley is back. And now she comes into Whitney's office, not to do his bidding, but to confront him. She says she's been sniffing around. I think she may go to the press. And Whitney says, does she know what you do for me? Aha. Okay. So now we have something here. She says, no. I neglected to tell her the difficult positions I've put myself in explicitly for you. I've felt unsafe since Abu Dhabi, and what Dolly, my little cousin, did for you with that hedge fund guy. So our crazy theory last time that Dolly was a prostitute hired by Whitney has in fact come true. She says, you think because I'm a piece of ass, I don't have enough gray matter to see through your shit. And your old assistant, that Crohn's disease chick, I spent this afternoon calling a few girls at my agency, and apparently she was one of ours, and they haven't heard shit from her since she worked for you. And Whitney is just like, he's not playing ball. He says, you knew what you were signing up for. You knew the benefits. And like, don't call her your little cousin because we both know what she is. Well, she's a prostitute. Now we are coming to learn that apparently so is Haley. So Haley says, she's not just a prostitute. She's a fucking girl. And what about your previous assistant? Now, we've been dangled this missing assistant since episode 1, like minute 45, right?
Yeah.
And she says, you know what? Maybe I should go to the press. And Whitney says, what do you want? She goes, $500,000. And Whitney laughs and just goes, fuck off. And she's like, all right, $750. And he says, that's the limit of your ambition. Because by the way, that's what I was thinking too. If you had actually this kind of compromising intel on this company that supposedly is worth tens of billions of dollars, you'd be asking for a lot more than $500,000.
But it actually goes back to what you said, like leave your opponent a way out. Like ask for number too high. You know what I mean?
I also think it is kind of ridiculous because we've seen the apartment that she lives in.
Yes,
we know how much she's been getting paid for these activities. $500,000 probably doesn't matter that much to her.
Yeah. Well, and two other things on that point. Number one, if you remember when she had that first conversation with Jim and she said, how do you afford this? My talents. And I was like, oh, I feel like the talents were sex. I was right. Mm-hmm. But also clearly, I mean, she probably was trying to ensnare Jim. I think she 100% knew who he was and was playing into that. I don't think that was an accident. And I think that makes that whole thing make a little bit more sense.
Does. It wraps it up neatly with a bow. I don't
like
know
they don't explicitly tell us that.
Yeah.
But I think it's pretty, it would be, I think that given she's working for Whitney, given Whitney knows that you have this reporter who's sniffing around, she gets an email from from Jim asking for information about this company. She likely went to Whitney and Whitney's like, go see what you can do with it.
Yeah. I think it's entirely possible. So after he laughs at her, she goes, fuck you. Put the whole lot on my payslip. If there even is fucking any. I mean, that's just another irregularity for them to find, isn't it? And if anyone asks, I'll play the ditzy assistant you always wanted. I don't know anything. And Whitney, annoyed, is like, you don't know anything. She goes, what difference does that make? Now that I think is the key, right? She knows just enough to be dangerous and she's got to figure out how to put that to work. He says, I'm not giving you a dime. And she says, then live with the consequences of your action. You fucking try hard loser. Now, I think that try hard line is so much more powerful than her calling him a bitch 10 times, because it's this whole thing back to our kind of the intractability of that British social standing. They're both Americans. She knows, and they both know that there are ways to get ahead and stuff like that. But he's such a try hard that he wants to try to make it here in the UK. And she's like, it's never happening for you. So now
this next scene I'm obsessed with.
So now we see Harper and Kwabena celebrating together, and Harper gets a phone call. It's Whitney. The first thing he asks her is, what's your favorite piece of classical music? He then says he got asked that in a campus profile once, says he had no idea what to say. Harper says, neither would I. Whitney says, maybe that's why I showed so much of myself to you so quickly.
And by the way, neither of them have an answer, because this is a tell of, are you wealthy and educated enough to know these classical
you'd know
pieces of music? Exactly. And so both of them can't answer it. They're like, I don't know. But if you went to Oxford.
But when he went to Stanford, I'm sorry. I just
Yeah, but I think it's different. Again, I went to, you studied English literature. I went to Brown and I studied biomedical engineering.
But you play the fucking flute, Kristen. You could have an idea of a favorite piece of classical music.
I could easily answer a piece of that. But I'm saying more about the Shakespeare references and all that shit. I have to freaking Google and rely on Jen to explain a lot of the Shakespeare writing. Apparently, I don't think
Google
that the
a lot of the
creators,
Shakespeare too, because King Lear ain't my favorite. But so Harper says, it must be exhausting. Now, back to the last episode where we talked about being tired, right? Being tired from living a lie. She says, living every moment, knowing you could be completely undone by one single question. Now, obviously, she's speaking here about what's going on with Tinder more literally, but more figuratively speaking, is this same burden of living a lie or trying to become someone that you aren't and putting on airs.
In terms of class.
Exactly. And trying to fit in.
Let me just say one quick thing. She goes from this lit up celebratory office to a room that is, again, dark. So they're both having this conversation in the dark. And I thought that was, again, a very interesting choice because, you turn on a light, right? So I feel like that was a very specific choice to make it so dark. She's also looking out the window. You have the almost billowing curtains. It actually felt very similar to with Rishi so I don't know, again, whether that meant anything, because I do think it's funny. There's a lot of overlaps with Harper and Whitney and Rishi and Harper. And we can talk about that in a sec.
So Whitney says, what about when you misspeak? Don't tell me you're not pirouetting through a social minefield. Their sneering nuance of manners, their insoluble absurdities of class, their bitchy pieties. The greatest mistake I ever made was moving tender to this piss-wet history project of a fucking island. So Whitney is effectively, in my mind at least, telling her, I've kind of run up against the limit of my ambition when it comes to moving social classes here, and I'm seeing just how far I can't get within the UK. And she says, maybe you should have stayed in a country where they didn't care where your money came from. Back to exactly what you said earlier, right? And Whitney says, I'm sure you think I have multiple faces, but there's millions of people like me. I read this literally in the sense of like, we have touched on briefly, and I do think want to unpack a little bit more the idea of a psychopath or a sociopath, about how they can use facial expressions to try to give the impression of reading people and feeling the same kind of emotions that neurotypical people feel.
Which is what Harper just accused Yaz of in the very beginning as well.
Which, to your point, I don't believe we've seen from Yasmin, but I do think we've seen from Whitney and, in my mind, Harper in the past. And Harper says, and I'm sure you're doing psychological acrobatics to convince yourself you're a normal case. Whitney, you are a construction. And I think this is a little bit of what Henry was uncovering too. It's like, I don't believe a word you're saying about yourself, even when you're pretending to open up. Like, even the things that he says in a moment of intimacy may not be true, but they're what he's convinced himself are the story of himself that's true. That's why I hear you when you're saying that you believe everything he says to Harper, because that's the person he can be honest with. But I don't know that even like what he's saying isn't.
I feel like it's like the villain who meets their match with like they're confessing right as they're about to do something illegal. That's why I believe it. Although I think that the irony of this whole thing is Whitney, we're going to come to find out that Whitney did not murder Jim. I don't know what happened with the assistant, so that's still a question mark. But the way that he reacts later, I don't think he's necessarily a murderer. And Harper could have very easily found herself in a similar state. She's not, because she got lucky. What I mean by that is, go back to last episode. She wanted to do the Archego stuff. She wanted to commit fraud, to do things that were wildly illegal. We've seen her do that in the Wrong Way Trade episode. We saw her do some very questionable things when she tricked Rishi when she was doing that huge trade, and DVD's on the line. Like, holy shit, like this is so wild. And so the fact that this tender short is working out, part of that was pure luck. I mean, it literally fell in her lap. They did the short based on Jim Diker saying, hey, like maybe there's something going on. And then they found the Sunderland thing. The Sunderland thing was not the smoking gun. I mean, it could have been, maybe, but like the fact that there was outright fraud was almost like a magic gift that they were lucky and stumbled upon. And we have seen that Harper is incredibly smart, but this particular trade felt like it turned out for her based on luck. The Pierpoint trade was just overhearing inside information, and it was luck. So the fact that she is in the right now was kind of luck. And I do think it's interesting, and this goes back to my point with Rishi. In the Rishi episode, White Mischief, the shit was down, shit was bet, and he got really fucking lucky. And he was on top of the world, and that was the beginning of his downfall. Now, I mean, who was it who kept her in line last episode? Or it was Eric. And Eric is about to be out of the picture. That's why it's like with Harper and Whitney, you have two Americans who are here in the UK who have been able to get by, both of whom do not have any problems doing questionably illegal activities. Whitney has gone down the rabbit hole of things being outright fraud and illegal, but I wouldn't put it past Harper to have ended up in the same place had that short gone the wrong way and had there not been people in place to like keep her in check.
Yeah.
And I am worried for what she could do from a self-destructive standpoint into next season, into even the end of this season, if she doesn't have someone who's able to toe the line. We know that Jesse Bloom, if he comes back, we have no clue. He went to jail.
Right.
So he doesn't have necessarily the ethics either.
But not only that, when information was dangled in front of Jesse, he did exactly what Harper expected him to do with it. I think your point here, if I may summarize, is that we got the conclusion about Rishi that, hey, listen, you're not even a good trader. You're just lucky. And Rishi says, what's the fucking difference? And he never learned the lesson he was supposed to learn because he never had to face consequences. And that's what he was seeking in his dissent, was that ultimate reckoning with consequences. And that's why he had that smirk on his face. It finally caught up with him. He finally got to face the music. Harper has never really had to face those consequences. She's never had that hard fall on her ass because at the end of the day, there's always been someone. It's been Eric, it's been Robert, it's been Yasmin, it's been someone to save her from her worst impulses. So what you're saying is there's a scenario where she could have been Rishi, just descending into madness and having this ultimate decline into basically like the end, right? Rock bottom. Or she could have been Whitney, where she's just constantly trying to build one lie on top of another, trying to outrun it, which it feels like Whitney's trying to do. He's trying to just outrun a lie here. So that she's somewhere on that spectrum of the Whitney to Rishi. But Harper's been successful, if you will, in this, not because of Harper is what you're saying so much, is that she has because of the people around her.
Yeah. Well, and I think, look, she did have the consequences when Eric fired her, ironically, in season 2 because of not graduating from college, which, by the way, we also have not talked about this season. And guess who also got it? I mean, again, I'm not saying that she is in any way like Epstein, but I feel like the authors are continually pulling on like the Epstein story with how they had Yasmin's dad die. And I mean, Epstein got a job at Bear Stearns faking that he graduated. And that was similar to what they did with Harper. Now, again, Harper is in no way like freaking Epstein, but it's interesting that these authors, creators continually pull different pieces from the Epstein story. Again, how did Ghislaine Maxwell's dad die? There was a mysterious boating accident on Lady Ghislaine, and they never really ruled it out, a potential murder. Now, again, I don't know that it was necessarily Ghislaine who freaking murdered her dad, but like, I'm just saying there's lots of random parallels. So
Yeah, so Whitney now says, don't be so reductive. Of course, I know about Solomon Asch, the Milgram experiment. People's will to be deceived is practically in their DNA. So I actually had to look this up. I didn't know the Solomon Asch. So forgive me for not knowing. I'll give you the Google summary. Solomon Asch conformity experiments showed that people will often give an obviously wrong answer to a simple question if everyone else in the group gives that same wrong answer first. These experiments demonstrated how social pressure and the desire to fit in can override an individual's own perception and judgment. So similarly, Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments basically tested how far ordinary people will go in obeying authority figures, even when instructed to inflict apparent harm on another person. I think this was those like recreation of the Nazis, right? Where it's like, can you do this thing that inflicts pain? Exactly. Yeah.
And they were told that if someone like didn't obey or something, they should like shock them. And they turned it up to max, even though it was not a real shock. Willingly. They were actors, but it showed the willingness.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, because you made the point that when it came to Tony Day, he didn't need the actual threat. Like Whitney wasn't threatening him. He was just doing what Whitney said because he kind of like wanted to obey his authority. So it was interesting that you were right about the fact that he was not actively afraid of Whitney. Whitney was using more of these types of methods to get him to do what he wanted.
Well, it's just dangling success in front of people, right? Now, as he's saying this, he's opening a drawer, moving aside all the files, and digging out wads of cash and a Lithuanian passport. So it looks to me like Whitney is considering just punching out and fleeing, because we see this with Lithuanian passport that he's going to open up, and it has a little doctored up picture of him inside with some gobbledygook name with like a wig on and like a mustache and a beard. So Harper says, I'm sure that a new forensic audit will find nothing but a Frankenstein balance sheet of tricks and concealments. He says, surely you know, as a transplant, life's an act of becoming, not being Harper. So everything we've talked about thus far. She says, you're a con man boxed in a historic crime. He says, you're starving for intimacy. She says, you called me Whitney. You know, I got a chill when I heard you speak about funerals so practically. Funerals have a function. It's for ritualistic grieving. It's a human need to deal with that shit. Maybe you've never experienced grief before. Also, like, maybe you're not fully human. Whitney says, my parents are still alive, which is an interesting thing. You could easily go to a funeral having never experienced the death of a parent.
Right.
And Harper says, my mom just died. Whitney says, and the funeral helped? She says, I didn't go. Whitney's like, what kind of a person doesn't go to their mother's funeral, Harper? And Harper says, I don't know, Whitney, maybe a monster. Although, by the way, again, this is the least like a monster we have ever seen Harper act. So I think it's this thing where it's like, he's saying you and I are the same, but I think Harper is proving that she is not.
Although honestly, they start to almost like show some glimmers of humanity with Whitney and who he chooses to call after her and calling Jonah, and like he wants a friend. And then he starts to sing, I want to dance with somebody left. Like the next thing he does, he starts to sing. But I do want to go back. It's funny because we had called Harper a sociopath. And by the way, this is a phrase that we have used very generously with basically all of our characters. I mean, we did American Psycho in London with Whitney based on literally nothing more than, the I Want to Dance with Somebody song coming on. But we are not psychologists. But the actual definition is characterized by consistent disregard for social norms, laws, and the rights or feelings of others, often manipulative, impulsive, deceitful, displaying a lack of remorse or empathy for their actions, often driven by emotional outbursts. When we have called Harper that, it has been because she has done stuff like that. I will say she is last season into this season showing so much more humanity. You start to see why she is doing some of the things that she does, but it can be true that characters are displaying signs of things that are a little crazy. Again, not caring that like, hey, maybe we don't just randomly open lots of different prime brokerage accounts or manipulate my trader, but HBO creates flawed characters. The masterful thing is creating flawed characters that you then care about. And that because they continually now show us her humanity, glimmers of just this like remorse. The fact that she didn't go to her mom's funeral, to the point, her mother was awful. Like, okay, she didn't go to some awful woman's funeral. That's not a monster. That's just her mother was a terrible human being. So
I think there's also this the feeling that she hasn't resolved all of her issues because she didn't go through that ritualistic grieving.
Right. Yeah.
And that's part of Harper's complexity, is that she doesn't participate necessarily in those normal societal milestones. And that's part of what makes her her. But to your point, I mean, I just think it's so masterful that we're rooting for Harper to win, but we're also rooting for Yasmin to win. And the two right now can't coexist. So what a great place that they've put us in, where I'm rooting for Harper to take down Tender, but somehow Yasmin.
Oh no, see, I totally think like after even getting to this point, I think that after what Yas just saw with Henry, what she sees with Whitney, I mean, yes, there's financial incentive for her tied up in the company.
Yeah.
But I totally think we're getting Harper, Yas coming together in the next couple episodes.
I agree, but that's neither here nor there. Right now, you're like, she's not there. She hasn't turned on Tender, and their interests are totally opposed. So all I'm saying is like, I think that they've done such a great job of putting them in these situations where you want her to win by doing something that right now, as the stakes are currently set up, will totally hurt her friend. Taking down her husband, taking down the company that she works for again. She was working at Pierpoint, and like doing it at her expense. Like, I think that we're going to have to see Yasmin. Yasmin will have to turn against Tender and join forces with Harper if they're going to reconcile.
Watching this episode, I was like, I thought that they were going to have a cage match to the death. I mean, like they literally say till the end, till the end. And then by about like 15 minutes into this episode, when Henry is calling her like a cunt and like all these horrible things.
No, she's the I agree that Yasmin doesn't believe in anyone at Tender anymore, but she's still part of the Tender machine.
Yes, but like I still think that I was excited for the next episode, thinking maybe we're going to see Harper and Yas team up. That's all.
I think that's entirely possible. I assume that's where this goes.
I assume. Right? I hope.
Because they've set up everyone at Tender as so. But yeah. Okay. So then there's this pause, and Whitney starts singing a cappella, I Want to Dance with Somebody, the Whitney Houston song that we had gotten those opening chords to in the very first episode that I clocked in the theater, which brings me so much joy that we finally get this. But also, why do we get this? Like at the end of the day, is it like he really just wants to meet someone who is his equal on all levels? He thinks that he's found that in Harper, and they're dancing together in this dance between Stern Tao and Tender. What is it? Like, why is he singing this to Harper?
My assumption was because of what we see next. I think they're trying to make him human, because we have only seen him like Whitney the sociopath, Whitney the psychopath, Whitney the crazy person. And it's like maybe trying to humanize him a little, that like he does want someone who will love him, or he wants to like connect with someone. And it's like you're seeing how all alone he is. I have no idea, but that was how I took it. I mean, again, it could also be
Harper looks sad when she's hearing Whitney sing to her, because I do think she actually is experiencing empathy for him in this moment.
Yeah.
And as they end that call, we get our, I don't even know what number we're at this point of our Dear Henrys, because we had like 3 in one go. We get, Dear Henry, how are we supposed to remain virtuous when the temptation is so great? We're still in the dark office, and Whitney calls Jonah. Jonah simply says, get a lawyer or kill yourself, whatever's cheaper. So we are, again, continuing to dangle this thread of suicide. It seems at this point that, frankly, he's contemplating the latter when Ferdinand slowly walks in and says, we need proper eyes on Tony Day. So now we know that Ferdinand is in on the whole thing, and suddenly it seems that he is the one really pulling the strings.
Yeah.
He says, I think it would be very counterproductive for Mr. Day or any other weak link to be off message right now. They, my emphasis there, but they have their methodologies for people who are asking the wrong questions. Whitney seems a bit scared hearing this. And he's like, no, I don't think we need to escalate. We can handle the situation without violence.
Yeah.
So now it's becoming very clear that whatever they've escalated in the past to whomever they are has come to violence.
Oh, see, I actually took it the opposite, which was that he's saying, oh no, we can do it without violence, meaning that the idea that they have their methodologies that might include violence is shocking to him, because then he says, good to know you're a man with some red lines. So I actually took it to be that he almost like didn't necessarily know that they were murdering people necessarily. And that this was the first like actual threat. Like he knew they had the compromise. They knew that they were, I mean, we'll see what they do to Eric, but there had never been this insinuation of like anything beyond that. Cause the way he's like, oh God.
But he says they have their methodologies. So for all you know, that
right,
the methodologies wouldn't include violence. So why would he say violence if he didn't think that they were capable of violence?
Well, because they're extorting people. So if there's some other methodology, what other methodology you're going to have? I feel like he seems like he was kind of shocked that this was even being suggested.
Yeah. I think they're spelling it out for us quite clearly here, that when things have been escalated, right, bad shit happens. And Whitney says, I know I'm not meant to interrogate the cell structure, but how did you get involved with these guys? So now we're learning that Whitney is in fact middle management in whatever the big picture is. So it reframes, and we've gone through this emotional reframing of Whitney, but now we're getting actually like it's spelled out for us in terms of the hierarchy of whatever this organization is, that Whitney is not subordinate to Ferdinand, which was made to seem totally the other way around in all of their previous dealings. And Ferdinand is subordinate to someone else. So I think in the past you had said like maybe, who was it? Like Tony Day is afraid
it was Tony Day.
Someone else or something like that.
Like someone else is listening.
It had to be like a Deus Ex Machina. Well, here we go. Now we've got the someone else that was not in any way, shape, or form, I think, predictable, unless you had known the Wirecard story coming into this. And so Ferdinand, now smoking a cigarette in the office, says, Razoblakini. Do you know the word? It's Russian.
Razoblashania or something.
Oh, you know it. Okay, great. Yeah. It's Russian for exposure, the bargaining power of the threat of exposure. Whitney asks, what did you do for them? Ferdinand says, credential theft. They wanted a picture of IBM's client base, names, networks, spending habits, further points of leverage. In my corporation, they cleared a path for me to CFO within a decade. And it was, in hindsight, a boringly easy thing to rationalize to myself. So here it is, the same as Tony Day. All these people had to be offered was a path to promotion that came unfairly, and they were shockingly willing to compromise. There never was threat of violence that made Tony Day do what he did. It was just the thrill of promotion, and same thing for Ferdinand. And Ferdinand says, after a certain quality of service rendered, I was able to make a connection that made it clear I was found by Cozy Bear, the tech arm of the SBR and the FSB. We'll explain both of those acronyms in just a sec. The particulars above and beyond the continued existence of the company are not really our concern. Narrative is all that matters now. Nobody can be off story. And he's the one patting Whitney on the shoulder now, showing that in fact, he is the one in control.
So the SVR, I mean, again, this is ChatGPT, is essentially like the CIA, but it's the Russian version. So foreign intelligence services.
It's their counterintelligence,
right. So it's like the CIA. Yeah. And then the FSB, the Federal Security Service, it was basically, they said like the FBI. And then Cozy Bear is they organize like cyber attacks against Western governments and corporations. And so he got hooked up with these guys because he was doing the credential theft. But this was why I said that the IBM Bauer, like they did have legit operations, like they did have the client names and everything, and they were sold to like Russia, but he doesn't want them to necessarily get sold to other people.
Yeah, no, but again, he's just like, that's not on the table or whatever. Like, I thought it was because there were no clients, but you're 100% right. But it's not that we know that he's been doing this. So like, there's definitely no like moral qualms he has about it or anything like that. But so this is our analog from Wirecard. So Jan Marsalek, the company's former COO, who was, I guess, like the chief architect behind all of their fraud. So after Wirecard collapsed, he fled Germany and disappeared and was later traced by journalists and investigators to Russia and Russian-controlled territory. And basically, there were a bunch of investigative reports that showed he had longstanding contacts with individuals linked to the FSB. And so there's been this theory that the SVB played a big role in basically like protecting him, getting him out of the country, hiding him, all that stuff. And then I think there's always been this suspicion, but like not any proof that Wirecard customers and clients, that their data was given to the KGB, to the FSB or Cozy Bear, whomever it was. But I don't think it's ever been proven based on my research. I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, they're in bed with with Russian agents and with Russia.
And this plot line would have been so annoying and so over the top and stupid, frankly, to have it come out that there's a big they, were it not for Wirecard.
Like was it not for the fact that it was legit?
If this wasn't based in reality, I would think this was such a stupid plot line to have it be like, by the way, we're 6 episodes in, you haven't heard anything about it yet, but everyone's secretly working for the KGB. Like, oh, give me a break. Except for it actually happened. Like that's the thing. The truth is so much stranger than fiction. And that's why this was a plot point that landed so powerfully for me, having done this research thus far, because had it just happened out of nowhere, I would have thought it was stupid.
Yeah.
And we get our now nth number of Dear Henry. Dear Henry, is it really any surprise we seek control when we are always at the mercy of forces so much larger than ourselves?
And I mean, it's like, that's very transparent as to what that is supposed to be.
Exactly. Again, I wasn't exactly in the poor Whitney camp, but I'm starting to feel bad for him because it's very clear that he wants out and is scared.
And well, like I said, it's this, they now are humanizing Whitney, who previously was just a psychopath. Like, and now you're like, oh, you're a psychopath, but like you have a heart. Maybe not.
You just wanted to have a bank, and I guess
you just wanted to be given respect in London. Now, why you couldn't have just created your little bank over in the US? But I do think that it kind of speaks to, it's like people who get involved with like the mob. Things start off and they're legit, and then you're trying to build your real thing, and then all of a sudden it's like there's some easy way out, and you like take a little bit, right? Or you're like trying to fill a hole. But it's like you can see how people can start off legit. And then unlike a Henry, who, I mean, he had this massive failure with Lumi, but he had his freaking prosciutto money, right? Like he had his uncle to fall back on, Lord Mostyn, and he can like do it again. I do wonder, it's funny because a lot of people were talking about just like the Great Gatsby that you had brought up. No. I'm saying you brought that up, and other people have been saying there's a lot, obviously, of that this season, which is true. But it's like the rich people always get away with it. But I don't expect Henry's going to be able to. But it's like, if this was the retelling, I feel like Henry is going to not make it. We've said this. We don't think Henry's making it out of this alive. I don't think Whitney is making it necessarily out of this alive either. I think the two of them.
Now that we know, by the way, that it's not just like, oh, Whitney's like, is he crazy? Is he capable of something? There's actual people ordering executions. Like,
but he is not one of them. So we did say at the beginning, we were like, American Psycho. We don't think he's murdering anyone. I actually don't think he's murdering anyone.
Neither do I.
So he is now just your run-of-the-mill criminal, but he is not a murderer, which, I mean, in the hierarchy of like terrible shit, as Harper said, like the run-of-the-mill sociopath, and she said that to Yaz, then you have criminal, then you have murderer. Like he's not a murderer.
No, he's not a murderer. And which is making me very sympathetic towards him now that I like know he isn't just like going out ordering assassinations. Okay, so we go back to Stern Town. We now have this point where it looks like Stern Town has everything. Eric has just had the best day of his life in the markets after a career full of a life in the markets. And we see him with his daughter, and she's juggling his baseball. Remember, thinking about the Mets in so many ways to lose. And he's asking her if she wants to stay over. In fact, he says, I think mom thought it was weird that you left the restaurant with me, not her. Meaning like they're forging such a close relationship. She wanted to come home with dad, you know? And she decides to stay. And he says, you're going to kill your old man, back to our old line about kids were destined to kill their parents. And he's got his back to her because he hears this email ping up. So he goes to get his phone and she says, I would never. And then looking like she's building up the courage, says, I love him too much. But Eric barely even hears this as she's standing there looking hopeful and expectant, waiting for his reaction because he has opened up an email on his phone, is staring at it, looking so confused, terrified, whatever. We can't see what he's looking at. He says, I love you too, honey, which is just like, no, you had the moment. You had the moment right there. You could have said like, I love you, whatever. Don't look at the email. And he's standing there now in the other darkened room. His face is only lit by the glow of his screen. He has to grab the chair for stability. His daughter in the background is like asking about ordering dessert to the room, just like this totally innocent, like father-daughter moment. And we see his phone and it's the video of him with the girl from the last episode. And in the email, there's the copy of her passport showing she's just a teenager.
Well, I mean, I will say the first time I watched it, I didn't realize she was underage. I thought he just got blackmailed with video of him and a hooker. And I was kind of like, his reaction seems extreme. And then when you actually see, because like you can look at what the birthday is, and it's March 25th, 2011. And so right now, I mean, as this episode airs, it's February. So that would make this girl 14, which is the same age as his daughter. And it goes back to sort of what his daughter did, where it was like they took photos of a girl dressed up like a hooker. And it's like, here he is in that same hotel room, right? Like now he's right here with his daughter. And he was with this freaking hooker who was literally his daughter's age.
Yep.
And it's just, I mean, he is shaking. And I mean, when I saw, I was like, what the fuck? I was like, I hope that this was a manufactured passport. But yeah.
So after this horrible scene, we get the opening notes of a classical piece of music that starts playing.
Which I love, by the way, because of the prior conversation.
Of course.
Yes.
It is Hungarian Rhapsody #2 in C# by C# minor by Franz Liszt. This, I presume, takes us back to the question that Whitney asked Harper, what's your favorite piece of classical music? So this is a piece that's used all the time in like old school Tom and Jerry cartoons because it's this like classic melodrama that just descends into chaos. And
it's like funny though, but it's like in the beginning of it, it sort of starts off and it's so like, it's contrast.
Yeah. But it got me thinking about this kind of game of cat and mouse that they are playing here as everyone's trying to get to the meeting with Tony Day. So we've got Ferdinand on the phone with Whitney saying, we've dealt with our square mile issue, meaning Eric. Yeah. And then he says, I'm told Day's meeting Stern Tao and Finn Digest for breakfast. Claridge's 7 a.m. And remember, Claridge's also is where Yasmin spent the night away from Henry at the beginning of episode 2. So while this classical music is playing, we've got another Dear Henry. We get Dear Henry. Wealth is the greatest disguise from our truest, most probable states. So we got Tony at breakfast looking around, clearly wondering like, who's the spy, right? We see Burgess walking to meet him. He's got his watch visible under his sleeve. We've got Whitney looking at his watch. Okay, so I actually screenshotted the freaking watches and did searches on them. Okay, but which got me nowhere, by the way. It just, so please tell me, what did you
no.
watches?
Sorry. I was looking at the time. So it was like 2 or 3 of 7. It wasn't so much. I was looking at the actual, I wasn't looking at the brand, but that's a good point.
There's been much ado in the financial press about like the accuracy of the watches that they have people wearing. So I thought we were supposed to get signals from this because
I like that.
Well, hang on. I didn't get very far with it, so I'm not sure if I did the right kind of search or if ChatGPT lied to me or whatever I used, Gemini, I don't even know. So we get Whitney looking at his watch, and it is apparently a vintage 1950s, 60s Longines Conquest calendar style watch. The market estimate of value is like $2,500 to $5,000. So it's not like some
for Eric
watch. No, for Whitney.
For Whitney, okay.
And then Sweet Pea's watch is a Rado-Centrix open heart automatic that retails around $2,500 as well. So the take from the interwebs was that Longines is more of a collector's item and that Rado is more of a fashion item. But I was like, does it show that they're equally matched, but like cut from 2 different cloths? I don't know. And then we also get like Ed checking his watch, but we don't see it. And Tony's is visible under his sleeve. So we got Harper saying TikTok, basically. We got everyone walking around with their watches. Dear viewers, if you happen to know like more about these watches and what they mean, I'm all ears because I did not get what I was hoping from the internet, which was going to be some like super coded inside joke. We get, again, Tony looks so freaking nervous while he's sitting there pretending to read his newspaper. He's like fumbling his coffee. It's spilling everywhere.
Yeah, he spills his coffee.
And Whitney gets there first. Tony stands up, almost tries to run away. Whitney tells him to sit down, not say anything, just like he said, by the way, on the phone, like when he first called him. And so he basically is like, listen, these guys are going to walk through the door. Okay, they don't know you. They've done nothing for you. And no matter how sweetly they've spun it, they are not invested in what happens to you from here. They view you as an accessory. They will use you to burnish their finances and status in their spheres. I saw actual value in you. I plucked you from obscurity and I gave you the world. And Tony's like, yeah, cool. I'm really grateful for that. But like, how does that help me now? And Whitney says, everything has led to this exact point. We are under siege. Yes. Which is a word that he actually like writes in the letter later, but doesn't say in the overview, which kind of drove me nuts. We just need one more united front, back to our war theme from the beginning. Don't let them call us criminals. It's too easy. We're brothers. You remember how I found you? Bankrupt. I made you a success. You think our competitors are morally unblemished? Wake the fuck up. Whatever we've done to get here will be swallowed up by our scale and rep. And Tony very astutely says, you cannot backfill a lie and make it true. You cannot just grow this company to the point where everyone's going to say, guess we won't try to remember what their actual cash flows were. And Whitney says, look at yourself. You're wavering at the gates of Valhalla.
I had to look that up. Which is like something from Norse mythology.
So just then, Sweet Pea walks in with Ed Burgess. They see Whitney talking to Tony. Whitney clocks them, but is like, don't look at them. Okay, look at me. You will impoverish yourself. You will immiserate yourself. And whatever protection or relief, or if you're stupid enough to believe it, immunity you've been promised will not spare you from the single moment when you wake up in a year or so in a 3-star shithole on a quiet Tuesday morning when the phone has stopped ringing and you realize just how far you fell from grace. So I'm glad you're scared. You're on the verge of making the biggest mistake of your life.
It's just so funny. It's like the phone will stop ringing and Whitney's probably sitting there like, that might be nice for a change here and there.
It also reminded me so much of kind of the stakes that we talked about when Yasmin was on that road trip with Robert, where she was staring down this life of mediocrity, potentially being like the minivan mom and like chose Henry's family instead. Now look at where that's gotten her. It's that whole thing of these are the actual stakes that people are deciding between when they choose to commit these frauds.
Yes.
It's not typically a knife being held to your throat and people being like, if you don't do this bad thing, you're going to die. It's something so much more banal. It's something that's just like, oh gosh, I really wanted to feel good about myself. And like, this was the shortcut to a path to promotion. And I didn't think to ask.
Yeah.
So everyone else comes in, like Sweet Me and Eric come into this breakfast. Whitney leaves. He makes like a big to-do or whatever. And they're like, okay, Tony, we've got you, whatever. And Tony's like, yeah, okay. But you can see very clearly, like, he's not going along with whatever the plan was. So now we go to CNN. Whitney's seated behind the desk. Eric walks in. And as they're touching up Eric's makeup, he whispers to Whitney, do not press a desperate foe too hard. When you surround an army, leave an outlet free. What if the outlet I use is through you? So this is from Sun Tzu's The Art of War. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, right? But it's like, don't put someone in a situation where like they don't have a path to retreat. They don't have a way to de-escalate because they may just blow themselves up and take you with them. And so that's what Eric is letting Whitney know is the position he has put him in, that listen, if you're going to take me down, I'm taking you down with me. And so the studio goes live and the headlines on the screen read, FTSE suffers heavy losses as tender plunges 28%. Then the subline reads, analysts scramble for answers as tender slump drags FTSE lower. Go ahead.
But that was what I was saying about just like the size of it. It seems a little bit, it would be like some, I don't know, ServiceNow is down. The issue last week was it was a bunch of companies and like SaaS in general, which was again impacting the Mag 7 and concerning people, but it wasn't like one company, like one little company would not drag down the entire FTSE, given the size. You said it's like trillions of dollars. So.
Yeah. And it cuts to Stern Tao, where Sweet Pea asks Harper why Eric went instead of her. And she says Eric insisted, wouldn't hear a no. So we're like, okay, now we know this thing about Eric. And we knew that, I mean, I don't think it would have been that crazy for Eric to go instead of Harper. Like, he was the one who told her about the fact that like Halberstrom wanted to go live on CNN. So like, it's not that crazy, but this little nugget is like, Eric's got something up his sleeve.
Yeah.
So back to Whitney, he says, sad day for a show like this when you give executive management of a listed company equal billing with some fund manager.
Which, by the way, it reminds me of kind of how he's all upset that people are not looking at him with the right amount of respect because of his class. And now he's like, here I am. I'm the CFO of this big company and some no-name fund. Yes, it's because partly, I mean, they're trying to short them. But also, it does feel a little bit like, I can't believe you're actually putting me on the same thing with this other guy. But it does feel almost like classish because he brings it up so many times, even though it's
his side, him, his trade book, my side, analysts, independent auditors, regulators. And Eric's like, you want me to give you a list of the number of times that regulators have been wrong? How long is your show? And then to Whitney, he's like, you look pretty shiny under these lights for someone's own control, AKA like you're sweating, right? Taking us back to Accra where they were sweating or whatever. And Whitney goes, like I said, this is not a serious person you're having on.
Which is Succession. Yeah, the not a serious people. When they said this, it was when the kids outbid Logan Roy for Pierce, going to absurd levels. So they won, but they won because they like paid a shit ton of money that they didn't have. And so he's like, you guys are just not serious people. Like, congratulations on winning, you fucking idiots. So it's almost like spat out when you're like, shit, you beat me, essentially.
So Eric says, cast enough doubt on everyone else, none falls on you. May we recall that was Otto Mostyn's original strategy. And Whitney says that's defamatory, better keep an eye on him. And the host jumps in and says, please pause, gentlemen, because joining us now, we have the CFO of the site of the most controversy yesterday, tender CFO for EMEA, Tony Day. And everyone at Stern Town starts freaking out, realizing Whitney got to Tony, okay? Also, can we talk about Harper's look for a second? So she's in this gorgeous tweed suit, but she has her hair up in a half ponytail with a scrunchie, and it makes her look very like 1980s.
Well, it's funny. No, I actually didn't notice the scrunchie. I'm just laughing because there was a Sex and the City episode where Carrie identifies someone who was not from New York because she was wearing a scrunchie. This is like a known thing that a scrunchie, unless they're making a comeback. I mean, I don't know.
Well, it's very strange because like Harper's hair, dress, appearance has been like such a piece of her power in this episode. In this season thus far. And that reads just very youthful to me, especially with the hair and like the half ponytail.
Is this the same outfit that she marches in with?
She'll be wearing this outfit for the rest of the season.
Because again, she looks phenomenal. It's funny. I did not notice the scrunchie. Had I noticed that, I would have had the same reaction you did. I just thought she looked like a badass because of her suit. Like she looks great. But the scrunchie is an interesting choice for the.
And they've taken her out of the gray power suit that they've had her in 4 or 5 different variations thus far. It's a skirt suit. It's a shorter skirt. Shorter skirts tend to read to me like more youthful. I don't know. It was just really weird that they had her in this.
The scrunchie is an interesting choice. I agree.
Anyways, so Tony says, now, as someone who has lived and worked in West Africa for a number of years, I can tell you that some of the structure of the financials of the companies we own down here, they're unfamiliar to some auditors. But the more pernicious thing that today has revealed is a typical way of seeing imposed by Western institutions driven by long-standing prejudices without any objective evidence. I'm going to call it the dark heart of Africa trope. So this relates to exactly what we were talking about in the last episode. And so in my mind, he's referencing Heart of Darkness, right, by Joseph Conrad, where the whole thing is like Africa was always characterized as like this dark place. And the irony is like the real darkness for like the characters in the book is what's inside them, what's inside the white imperialists. Yeah. And so, this is double flipping on its head all of these same subversive themes where Tony is suggesting that all the performative platforming that everyone's doing is disguising true racism and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, you are the guys using that so that nobody would come looking and asking any questions and blah, blah, blah.
Well, I mean, and I think that you thought that last episode that they literally then are hiding behind it and being like, oh no, you're the racist for like even thinking that there might be something there. And it's like, no, you're committing fraud and then wrapping it in this to try to shield yourself, which is like extra effed up.
Exactly. So, they're all freaking out, obviously, at Stern Town because they're like, we thought we had nothing to worry about with Tony. He'd agreed to an on-the-record interview. And Kwabena says his testimony was going to speed the collapse. Where's the pressure from him?
This is so dumb. I'm sorry. I will say that doesn't make any sense because like they've been calling for a new audit if people are concerned. And by the way, if they're now trying to get into the US, like there's the pressure for a new audit. So there was a lot of Quabbin has done this a number of times where like he says stuff like that, and like you understand what he's trying to set up for the user,
Like,
for the viewer, but you're like, this doesn't make any sense, because like they would definitely need a new audit after all of this
scandal,
right? I mean, if you're an investor, you're gonna be like, I want to see the new audit, and if you're not going to do one, then that's going to be wildly problematic. So that they've already have the reason for the new audit. Like, where's the pressure going to come from? It's out there. Like, it's there. Anyway.
Okay, so basically Whitney sees what Tony has just said and is like, case closed. I've done this. I've totally saved my company. Eric then gets his chance for a rebuttal. He says, save your breath, okay? There's absolutely nothing this gentleman could say about me that I won't willingly say to your viewers about myself. He says my fund packages itself as some sort of crusader for market efficiency and societal good. I make no claims to that effect. I'm a money manager. My only operating software is the profit motive. That and my id. They're probably indivisible now. It bleeds into every aspect of my life, for good or bad, often very bad. However bad you want to tell the audience I am, let me tell them, I'm worse. So make your judgment call. But once made, don't let this guy sat across the table from me off the hook from exactly the same judgment. Let's give this guy the benefit of the doubt. Let's even say he's on the money.
By the way, Henry is now watching on his TV screen now. So as the dialogue continues, now Henry is actually paying attention on the television.
Yes. Would that outright negate that his enterprise is a fraud? And Harper, who is also watching, now says, wow, almost to herself. And then Eric says, I'm falling into his trap, more and more words. Let me finish with two new ones. New audit. Now we cut to Henry, who has been watching all of this in his salmon-colored sweatshirt, okay?
Yeah.
And he leaps out of his chair as we hear the interviewer ask, would Tender submit to a new audit? And Whitney replies, yeah, we're audited every year. But Henry starts shouting for someone to get Jacob on the phone. We hear Eric's voice again calling for a new audit on TV. Henry finally gets Jacob on the phone and says, I'm afraid this isn't going to be an easy conversation. So we now see Yasmin and Haley together in Yasmin's apartment. And Yasmin is actually in a robe. And Haley is acting like she kind of came over to comfort her, like as a friend. She says, I can only imagine how you're feeling. And Yasmin says, no, I don't think you can, actually. She asks her point blank how much she knew about what Whitney was doing. And Haley says, nothing, only the way he operates. So Haley explains that he hired her from an escort agency and is pretty sure that all his assistants were escorts placed strategically in front of people, men, Whitney wanted them to get close to. They all had similar profiles, young, willing. And she says Whitney told them they'd be on camera sometimes. She says she flew to Abu Dhabi, was placed in front of some Emirati guy on the board of Al Mirage, aka Pierpoint.
Yeah.
And all she knew was she had to get him into a specific room for it to happen. So now, by the way, it's clear that Pierpoint's investment in Tender only happened because Whitney instructed Haley to get some blackmail from one of the board members at Al Mirage. Yasmin obviously now understands that he was using these videos to extort people. So she asks Haley if their threesome was on camera. And Haley doesn't want to say anything, but basically like,
yes, which we knew because of the way that Whitney was talking about,
the way that Whitney already
was talking to her
about it. And so she asked, like, what did Whitney want you to do with us? And Haley says, he said, be in their lives. And she says, he exploits fragile people. I'm sorry. So to your point, she is delivering the
better
same
messenger
news as the better messenger to Yaz that Harper delivered earlier when she was like, you guys got duped. It's okay. Like, whatever. She's giving it. And so Yaz just looks totally defeated at this point because now like it's absolutely incontrovertible evidence that she was played the fool. So she says, what do you want from me? And Haley says, Yaz, listen, this is what I know. I've used every inch of my body clawing my way to every fucking cent. Only God can judge me and he doesn't exist. I'm done fucking clawing. Access. Access is what really makes you rich. And Yaz says, what does that mean to you exactly? Some good tables, tickets to Wimbledon, Chiltern burned down? I had to look this up. Did you know the Chiltern reference?
No.
So I guess
I was like Saltburn. I was like, I don't know.
I guess the Chiltern Firehouse is a hyper-exclusive hotel and restaurant in Marylebone that for the past decade plus has functioned as a gatekeeping hub for political insiders, financiers, celebrities, fixers, and power brokers.
Well, and I will add, I did think it was interesting that Haley said, only God can judge me and he doesn't exist. After the Kierkegaard thing, we have seen that religiosity be brought in. And then now you have Haley, but I actually do think it's consistent with the young generation seems to be less religious overall, but it was an interesting 180 where they were getting inspiration from some Bible verses. And then now it's just like, God doesn't exist.
Well,
So.
it doesn't exist to Haley, right? Haley
Yes.
exists in the corporeal world. I don't think it's so much about her age necessarily. I think it's about her Americanism and who she is and what she has done to get by. And that's how she lives with herself. So Haley says, I want to meet people. I want to have what you have. And I think this is interesting too, going back to what you said earlier about Yaz and Harper, that I think they each want what each other has. And so hearing this from someone else as like a complete outsider who's coming up, who sees Yaz and wants what she has. And Yaz says, I don't trust you. And Haley says, no, but I think you understand me. And Yaz considers this and she asks, do you understand me? And Haley says, in any way you ask.
Yeah.
Now,
I took this as sexual actually, because she's sort of like looking at her mouth, like, and who knows? I mean, if that's purposeful or whatever, definitely part of it could have been just like a friendship, because Harper has now almost like abandoned her. So she would kind of have to go back tail between her legs to go to Harper and be like, which I still hope that she does. But I mean, Yaz does turn like crazy sexual and stuff, like when she feels like she's not in power, and she is now definitely not in power. So I don't know. That was kind of my
interesting. I just took this to mean like, I'm your ally now. Whatever you need from me that you need me to do, I'm happy to do it. I no longer work for Whitney. I'm your ally, effectively, is just how I took it. But she does, to your point, like Yasmin does reach across and like touch her arm and move her hand down her arm and eventually holds her hand.
Yeah.
So Harper comes home to the Stern Tower.
This next scene, sorry, I literally was crying in this next scene.
Were you?
Yes.
So she's got her two little lunches in hand. She's all chipper. She sees Eric and she say, hey, really pin that motherfucker today. Can I be honest? All the things I thought I knew about you, I just didn't think you had it in you, but you did it. It was great. I was wrong. And so Harper has now become the person we always wanted her to be in this one moment. She's thanking Eric. She's recognizing his greatness. She's admitting she was wrong. We have never heard Harper admit she was wrong.
But I will say, I don't know why she thought that like he wouldn't be able to do this. He has been able to give these big speeches his whole career. That's what he does. We go back to the Don Draper thing of the Mad Men, of the marketing. That's what sales is. Like, so he's been doing this sales job for his whole career. We saw him give that huge speech she wasn't there, but like at Pierpoint in the last season. He is good at creating a narrative and selling people on whatever it is. So I was surprised that she's like, I was so shocked that you had this in you. I think the reverse could be said, because Harper has like a history of having panic attacks and like fumbling the ball a little bit when the stakes are high. But it was such a strange thing, in my opinion, for her to be like, I didn't think you could do it.
I think what she didn't know that he'd be able to do was basically be this suicide bomber. Be like, hey, anything you're going to say about me, I'll beat you to it.
But she also doesn't know
about myself. Of course
she doesn't know
like,
how
she's like,
much of a suicide game of chicken he was playing. Yeah.
Of course. I think that's what she didn't know that he was capable of. And that's what she's so proud of, because I think that's, her impulse is being like, dude, I don't care how low you're going to go. I can go lower if need be.
Yeah. But she has no idea that they have any of this compromise on him.
Right.
So sort of like, Whitney, what are you going to do? You're going to say, hey, you work for a short only fund? Like, cry me a river.
To me, actually, you brought up Succession before. This reminded me of Succession, where Logan chose to sacrifice Kendall because he thought he wasn't a killer. And then when Kendall goes on TV and throws Logan under the bus, Logan smiles because he's like, oh, you are a killer. Like the best.
Yeah.
I assume the best. So Eric has proved that he's a killer.
I know. I just don't know why Harper would doubt that. That's all. It was fair. Like, sorry, continue.
So Harper is like, wait a minute, where is everyone? And starts to feel like a horror movie, right? Because we all know what's coming. Eric, choking back tears, says, you want to come in here a sec? And there's a man sitting at the table. Harper's like, who's this? And Eric says, you might be standing on the verge of something great. It's yours, not mine. Marvin represents me. I'm going to let him talk for ease. It'll be undiluted and clean. By all means, call me a coward. It'll be a lot easier on me. So apparently, Marvin, we come to find out, has been instructed to draw up a deed of assignment. So Eric is transferring all the rights and benefits of his ownership in Stern Tow to Harper. And they go into
Which is
factoring.
insane, by the way, because he's not only transferring everything, he's giving up any like upside. He's giving up any distributions. Like he basically says, all I want is my money back that I gave in my initial investment. And I want that to be put into a trust. Now, I do think it's interesting. Someone made this point like last episode or a few episodes ago, he takes the money that was like earmarked for his daughters and someone was like, and gives it to his true daughter. And I mean, the thing is that at the end of the day, the money that he could make from this, which by the way, he should be entitled to, he put up like all of the risk capital and like went out and fundraised and all that stuff. That's money that then his daughters are not getting. So like at the end of the day, it's money that's put in a trust. So again, the upside that he is giving up is also giving that to Harper. And obviously we see him repairing his relationship with his daughter. I thought that was beautiful. And I mean, I'm so glad that hopefully he will at least be able to like nurture that in the future and who knows. But I love that when they made the point that this was money that was taken from his other daughters to give to Harper, who's like a surrogate daughter.
Yep.
But yeah.
So Harper's like, what the fuck is this? And the lawyer says, my client has informed me that there are reputational risks that could render him a faithless servant should he continue to be employed at Stern Tao. So he does not give the exact details, but he basically lets her know that like they've got something on him. And Eric says, yeah, and no funeral. So back to our conversation about funerals, back to the conversation between Harper and Whitney about like what funerals represent, grieving, the fact that Harper like didn't properly grieve the death of her mother. And now she's
killing your parents.
New thing to grieve. Exactly.
Yeah.
So Harper is like, can you please tell me what this is all about to Eric? Like, we can fix this, right? And Eric says, watching you present, I thought I was incapable of feeling pride for anyone but myself. I'm really glad you've proven me wrong. He's choking back tears. Kristen's crying at this point. And
it was again, because like, this is the thing. I said this like so many times that it's like, when we talk about Endgame, right? It's Harper and Yaz, but for me, it's always been Eric and Harper. Like literally episode 1 opens with Eric interviewing Harper, and they just have had this amazing connection from the start. Yes, Yaz and Harper have had this like beautiful friendship, but the way that Eric hired this girl, took her under his wing, and I mean, literally, like, I mean, hate the fact that she didn't go to college, but like was always willing, like he loves her as like the daughter that he's hopefully now going to have with his like real daughter. But I just like, again, like they are my two. And also it doesn't hurt that, I mean, Eric has always been my favorite character.
Yes, absolutely. So he won't tell her what it is. He says, I don't want you to remember me that way. She marches over to the desk, chokes back tears, then signs. Then as she stands up, she basically like clears her face, walks over to him, and furiously whispers while she's pointing in his face, I will always remember you like this.
Yeah.
And so like for basically being a coward. This is the most like Shakespearean tragic
but the irony,
moment. It's like they finally have their victory together and they literally cannot savor it for more than a second.
I mean, the irony is that he wasn't a coward. He had just some of the worst like compromise on him. And he still went out and he did that knowing that they could freaking release that at any time. So he was as brave as they come, and he is sacrificing himself for her. So it's the least cowardly thing I think that he could do. My concern about this is back to the point with like Harper having questionable ethics. I think that this is unfortunately clearing the way for something possibly bad to happen, but B, possibly clearing the way. You know, I earlier said there is now a Eric-shaped hole in her life in this fund. And I wonder if the other, I mean, again, it wasn't even a father figure, but like the other man in her life.
No, 100%. Jesse Bloom was
Jesse
like
Bloom.
Such an important figure in season 2. Again, I was shocked that they wrote him off because they did such a good job with that relationship. So
that's why the fact that they brought him up in the same episode that they are literally getting rid of Eric, which breaks my heart. He better come back in season 5. Yeah. So I was literally crying as like I watched that scene.
Yeah.
But this, I mean, this is
what
this
so
is this
beautiful.
whole.
This was one of my favorite scenes in the whole show.
Yes.
So, all right.
So then final scene.
Back to Tender.
Convertible. Sorry.
Convertible nonsense. So Whitney and Ferdinand come in to talk to Henry in his salmon-colored sweatshirt. Henry's not even looking at them. We find out that the stock has rallied since Whitney's appearance, quote unquote, away from PurePoint's convertible trigger price.
By the way, who is going to be like, oh, the share price has gone down. Let me convert into equity on my choice. No. Again, it is a bond. It is a convertible bond. It is called a bond because it is a bond. It converts into equity. You only convert into equity if the share price does well.
The cocoa, right, converts into equity when
but not at the investors, but
right. It's when the stock is in distress. So again, they have all the pieces here, right?
Yes.
Again, it was we're going to need cash because they're going to put this bond back to us because their call option is right. Yeah. So we're going to need cash. That was the problem they said at the beginning. No, those are the stakes of a putable bond. Now they're saying we've gone away from the low strike of a cocoa, which is a real thing as the share price drops because you're in a liquidity crunch. You need that tier 1 capital. So it's going to convert into equity. But again, not because Peerpoint wants it to. So like it doesn't.
Again, and I want to be very clear. We've said this before. I don't want to sound like these pretentious, obnoxious assholes for talking about this. This makes us happy that we get to talk about this. They do so much correct and everything great. So it's like when there is these few little threads that we can pull on that we can use as like a teachable moment, but also we could talk about, like, it makes us very excited.
Well, also I see on social media endlessly everyone being like me pretending I understand what's going on in industry and all these people who don't understand it. If you do understand what's going on, the plot is that so much richer. Yeah. Like it's great. And I think people would like the show so much more if they understood the finance. So that's what we're here for.
Yeah.
So anyways, Henry lets Whitney know that he fired Jacob. And Whitney's like, you can't do that. And Henry's like, yes, I can. Okay. And so they end up standing nose to nose. And Whitney is like, that was a grave mistake. And Henry asks why. And Whitney just says it again. And Henry's like, you can't even bring yourself to tell me why. Freaking Henry seems fully convinced that fraud is going on and that this incompetent auditor / like one who's under his thumb or whatever is behind all of it. He's asking him to his face to tell him that there's fraud. And he's like, you can't even bring yourself to do it. And so he says, we're going to hear pitches from other auditors imminently. Whitney advises against it. And Henry finally says, yeah, you know what? Fuck your advice. As if anything you've pushed on me has anything but your own interests in mind. Now, obviously things that have been pushed on him are A, this role of CEO, but B, also like the relapse, the alcohol, you get up and be the face of the company. And so when he stands there and kind of just this weird motion, he turns around a couple of times and he puts his hand to his mouth and removes it as though he's like kissing someone goodbye. Did you clock that motion?
No, I didn't see that part.
And Whitney ultimately says, guess you're going to do what you're going to do. Henry says, yeah. And Whitney says, so in that case, I guess it's best said like this. And he whips the letter out of his pocket, puts it on Henry's desk.
And I was going to say the way that they read it though, literally it ends with, there's the hole in my bucket at the end, but everything else is all new things. So I was like trying to figure out.
Well, he said, I struggled with how to start this letter so many times. Those were all the false starts he had to the letter.
Oh, that's what that was. Okay. So all of those other things. Oh, that makes sense.
Those
so
that clears
it up. So the Dear Henry.
The Dear Henry was the beginning of the letter.
Yeah, understood. So then it's the Dear Henry. I drafted and redrafted. Okay. That makes sense. Okay.
So as Henry, by the way, with his fancy letter opener, because this man is so freaking like pampered that he can't even like open a letter with his bare hands. He has to get out his like fancy silver letter opener. We cut to all of a sudden, Whitney in the elevator pulling out both phones, and he's taking the SIM card out of one phone and putting it into his burner phone or whatever it is. And he gets some voice in freaking Russian on the other line asking for a code, I presume, because Whitney responds, it's Alpha X-ray 612 Lima Lima 234 in military code. Now, part of me wondered, because he was giving that code not in like Russian or whatever, that maybe he's actually working with the Americans exactly against his Russian overlords at the KGB. That was my only thing, because I was like, wait, why is he responding in English?
Well, I was joking. I like texted you, Jen. I was like, how funny would it be as if he gets arrested or something? Then he just goes and like gets a pardon by Trump, because it's been this whole thing where Trump just pardons all these criminals, especially if they can somehow, I don't know, do business with them.
Maybe he can get a pardon. So we finally get to see this letter. It's written in this like tiny, perfect script. It's multiple pages long.
And it's scripts, by the way. It's become this thing. Kids are no longer learning scripts, how to write in cursive, and it's in cursive, and it's like nice cursive.
We know from his passport that he was born in 1985, so he is our contemporary.
A year younger than us.
So we hear, Dear Henry, I drafted and redrafted an opening to this statement. I think maybe the time for poetry and ornament has passed. Practically, it's very important that you understand everything now that you're implicated. I write to say we are stronger together and we must violently pursue an end game which delays our detractors, making their lives harder to close in on our goal. People are going to accuse us of criminality, and parsing the details of our story in this way is prejudicial. But it won't stop people making the case against me, against us, and by that very definition, against you. You see, dear Henry, there's a hole in my bucket. And like I said,
which goes back to the beginning.
Yes.
Yeah. The circularity.
Did zoom in on the letter, and it's read by Whitney out of order from how it's written. But regardless, we've got Henry just reading it in horror. And then it cuts to what looked to me like a green screen almost of like this 1950s suburban street. And we see Eric walking away while that Judy Collins, Joni Mitchell song plays in the background.
Yeah. I did think it was interesting going back to the Eric commentary about leave an outlet. And it kind of feels like Whitney has not really left him an outlet. And it's like, I don't know. I could see him just being like, fuck you. I mean, my life was over. I was willing to kill myself. My wife doesn't love me. I'm CEO of this company. It's going to be the second freaking company that I've now been at the helm of a scandal with. I could see him being like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to blow up this whole thing. At least if I'm going to go out, I'm going to go out and I'm going to take this shit down with me. But I just thought that was an interesting choice that they cut to Eric, and Eric was the one who made that point. And also, like, what does he have?
Based on just the Wirecard story, there's such a simple door open for everybody to come back. The door is, okay, Wirecard goes down, Ferdinand goes down, and everybody can turn like state's evidence against these people. And Eric can be like, dude, this was entrapment with this like underage girl. And he has like a path back. And Rishi can be like, I was if, again, that was like my dream that he was, I know that sounds crazy, that he was hired by Whitney. I don't think Whitney hired, now I think it's the Russian agents
KGB,
who were doing, all the work or whatever, but that he would have been hired by them because now he couldn't get the dirty money from Harper anymore. So he had to get dirty money from someone even more nefarious.
Yeah.
But I do think there's always a path back for our characters. All that has to happen is the criminal wrongdoing of Tender to be uncovered. And this blackmail against Eric is kind of expunged from the record, so to speak.
Right.
Well, so we have resolved the kind of Eric and Harper plot line for the time being. So to your point from earlier, I think the only place the show has to go from here is now what's actually going to happen with Harper and Yaz. And it's their end game for this season. All right, really quickly, who were we bullish and bearish on?
I mean, bullish on Harper and bearish on Whitney. I mean, not bearish on Whitney, bearish on Henry.
So bearish on Henry, bared to the max on Henry.
Which is very sad.
I am bullish on Yasmin, to your point. Where basically what I was just saying is like, I didn't think we were given anything in the beginning of the episode to like get to the point where I thought you were getting really quickly with like Yasmin turning towards Harper's team. But I think by the end of the episode where we see all things revealed, I do think that seems like a very reasonable outcome to go from here.
Oh, see, as soon as she started to like question Whitney and like I was like, oh, okay, the seeds are planted. I feel like this is where now they can, but it was funny because it was like till the end. And then it was like a few minutes later and she's like, oh, you're drinking. And I mean, you're about to try to like sleep with my husband. Like, maybe don't do that.
Well, thank you guys so much for another great episode. I had fun taking the reins for the day with the play-by-plays, and we will be back with another episode. I can't believe we're finishing out the season. Only 2 more to go. Thanks, you guys. Yeah.